Almand. Representative Angelos. Representative Harrelson.
Here.
Representative Pendergraph.
Here.
Representative Sherwood.
Here.
Representative Smith.
Here.
Senator Driscoll.
Here.
Senator Rue. Here. Senator Larson. Here. Senator Smith. Co-Chairman Bear. Here. Chairman Salazar.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Pendergraph, would you do us the privilege of saying a prayer this morning for us?
Before I begin, many of you will remember our colleague, Tamara Trujillo. Tamara is suffering from cancer and is undergoing surgery this morning, so we'd like to remember her. And this is also the 3rd anniversary of the reversal of Roe v. Wade. So shall we pray? Lord, we thank you for being here with us this morning. We ask your wisdom, your strength. We ask for your guidance. We ask for your special watch, care, and comfort for our friend Tamara. Comfort her family. We ask especially for her healing, and we turn this over to you completely. Thank you again for being here with us, for guiding us, and giving us your wisdom. We praise you, we love you. Amen.
Amen. Representative, would you lead us as well?
Certainly. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Representative Pendergraph. So we have a bit of a full schedule today. Mr. Richards, do you want to come up and we'll start with the interim topic number 2, sales and the youth tax distribution.
Morning, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Don Richards. I'm the Budget Fiscal Administrator with LSO. Pursuant to the chair's direction, I'll give a brief background, about 10 minutes, no longer than 15 minutes, on Joint Appropriations Committee priority number 2, which is sales and use tax distribution. And Management Council, at your request, directed you to review the sales and use tax, as well as the local government direct distribution model, and consider alternatives to provide stable and consistent funding to local governments. The memo before you is 12-01.
Mr. Richards, my fault. I wanted my co-chair to make a couple comments before at the beginning of today, and I'd like to recognize him. Mr. Co-chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had discussed this when we took on this topic, and I want to try to give the committee an idea of why we wanted to take this on and what our ultimate goal is. And hopefully it'll become the goal of the entire committee and the legislature as well. We have for years, I think we'll hear testimony from Mr. Richards as to how long we have been giving a direct distribution to cities and towns, but I believe this began as an effort to replace the lost revenue from the grocery tax when we eliminated the grocery tax. And so it was supposed to be temporary, that we would help our local governments, towns and cities and counties, when they lost this source of revenue. I do believe it was an appropriate move to remove grocery taxes for the regressive nature of that tax, where it affects the poor the most. So it was a good move, but it did affect our smallest towns, their revenue streams. We have stepped in as a state and maintained replacement of those funds via a direct distribution. There's been a request that we change the amount of distribution or percentage of distribution that we get from property taxes, sales taxes, between the state and the local governments. This is the 4 cents or 4% sales tax that goes to the state. And we'll hear testimony, and it's in our materials, that this started at 100% of that money going to the state. It changed to 70 at one point, and then to 69 where we are today. And before us today is a decision to be made as to whether we lower that again. But if we do, in an effort to help cities and counties, I think that the effort to backfill that old tax that was eliminated should be a counterbalance to reducing the revenues to the state. And so that's our goal, is to have a win-win situation for the local governments and the state. We're already paying out to those local governments, and we're giving up something that's coming in. So if we can let those two offset, it would be a great move for this committee to accomplish that. It will be a math problem. And so those of you who are challenged at math, this is going to be a real gymnastics effort for your mind. But some time ago, the Madden formula came about, and my hope is that we will come up with a new formula that will work for those local governments as well as the state. And so we may come up with the Driscoll formula here today or during this interim. But whatever it is, it needs to be a win-win situation for those local governments and for the state. And one of the things that local governments have had to endure is a biennial effort and debate about what that local distribution should be. If we change this tax distribution, then that vote would probably not be seen every 2 years. And so it would be something that the local governments could count on consistently receiving these revenues from sales tax. So that's what I'm hoping for. I hope that the entire committee sees value in that, and we can really come up with a great formula for the people of Wyoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Richards, apologies again. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the memo before you, 12-01, is broken out into 4 sections. The current and historical sales and use taxes per your priority topic, the current and historical local direct distribution funding, major state-involved local government revenues, which is also detailed in attachment 2 and goes beyond just local government direct distribution and sales and use taxes. And then also the final section is a glimpse of FY24, which was the most recently completed fiscal year, per capita sales and use, per capita direct distribution, and per capita ad valorem taxes, just to get a sense of where various cities, towns, and counties receive their funds. Hopefully the memo in my comments this morning will give not only the factual history, but provide a little bit of the context of what and why this occurred. Currently, the statewide sales and use tax is established at 4%, which has stayed the same since the legislature last modified it in 1993. The distribution currently is 69% to the general fund, and as Chairman Brer said, 31% to the locals. The distribution of this is simpler than the direct distribution for sales tax. That 31% local share, first of all, 1% is taken out of that for administrative costs and paid to the general fund, which leaves a net 30.69%. And then the next initial distribution is a 1% carve out to provide all counties at least $40,000 flat amount, and the balance of that 1% on a per capita basis. So a little bit to provide a base amount to all of the smaller counties is the effect of that. Then 99% of the local share, which is the vast, vast majority, is distributed to all the counties based on the point of sale. And then within each county, the distribution is based on population. So municipalities would benefit from the unincorporated population, and towns also benefit on a per capita population basis. The history of the imposition of the sales and use tax, it was initiated in 1935 at a 2% rate, And in 1935, it was also a temporary sales and use tax. And the bill imposing that was self-repealing. 2 years later, it was extended, increasing to 2.5% in 1965, 3% in 1967, and 4% in 1993. In Table 1 on page 2 of the memo, you can see that there was essentially, and I say essentially, no distribution to local governments for until 1967. The local share grew to 33% in 1975, and I would say bounced around that level for the next 50 years, hitting a high of 36.2% and hitting a low of 28%, but right around that 1/3 mark for the last 50 years. Sales and use tax collections tend to follow inflation with retail products and population growth. However, given Wyoming's economy and its outsized importance on the extractive industries in Wyoming, total collections are significantly impacted by mining. And in my mind, I think pipes and drag lines. Those generate a tremendous amount of sales tax, even more than all of tourism in many years. And this is particularly evident in fiscal year 2007 on Figure 1, page 4. That was the year that...
I'm sorry, Mr. Richards. Co-Chairman Bear?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I just wanted to briefly ask you a question about what you just said. You said even more than tourism. Do we have a way of tracking what portion of sales tax comes from tourism, or is that just an estimate? Do we have a way of knowing really how much sales tax comes from tourism versus everyday? Because we often say, you know, non-citizens are paying this tax or that tax. And so I'm just curious if you have a way to track that.
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Bear, we rely heavily on the research that is provided by Dean Runyon Associates, which also does work for the Board of Tourism. And they do modeling. It is an estimate. It is not a known figure. And the reason for this is citizens participate in lodging. Citizens participate in restaurant purchases and retail purchases, and so do tourists. So we rely on those estimates. Mr. Chairman, continuing on that Figure 1 on page 4, what I think is particularly striking is fiscal year 2007 was the year that the food tax was eliminated. And you will see that the total sales and use tax collections increased, and they increased pretty dramatically. And that occurred during a relative boom time in the minerals industry. You'll recall the summer after that, oil was selling at $145 a barrel. And it illustrates that overwhelmed. It was just good. In 1994, when the sales tax increased to 4%, which illustrates, it didn't increase by 25%. And it illustrates the lack of economic activity in that year, bad timing, if you will, for collections. Moving on to the second portion of the memo, which is the local government direct distribution. This was initiated in 2004, largely as an outgrowth of the de-earmarking effort, which changed the federal mineral royalty and severance tax distribution to all entities within state government and local government. It also occurred at the same time of robust growth in the natural gas production of the state of Wyoming, coal bed methane in this county, the development in Jonah area, as well as robust oil and growing coal revenues. To begin, this formula, the local government distribution formula, has been changed over time, several times in fact. It is designed to be dynamic, meaning it changes every year pretty significantly. And B, it also is intentionally providing additional funding for smaller communities, smaller counties, smaller municipalities, as well as those that are deemed revenue challenged. Other words for that might be hardship or smaller assessed valuations. LSO, this is particularly evident this year. LSO released our estimates of these calculations in April, and I received a tremendous number of calls from municipalities indicating that they maybe questioned our calculations because the formula had changed so much. It got to the point in late April where I had started questioning my own numbers because so many municipalities were calling. Indeed, I am relieved. OSLI has posted their actual payments last week, and we were within $1 of rounding within most municipalities. I think $2 with one municipality. But let me explain why this occurred. Laramie, from Representative Sherwood's point of view, had a large wind project, and it actually moved out of that revenue challenged category. And so they will be receiving less direct distribution this year. Because of that, all other communities have a better chance of getting more. There are also just some weird activities in the Bighorn Basin, here in Gillette, over in Kimmerer. Each of those tax collections were different than the statewide average. And in Gillette's case, for example, it generated a lot less sales tax this most recent fiscal year than the rest of the state. So Gillette, where we're at today, is receiving a fair bit more in the direct distribution than they did the prior year. That's exactly as the formula was designed. Those entities that are doing well get less money. Those entities that are doing difficult or having revenue challenges will get more money. That's not to say that next year I fully expect Laramie to return to being a revenue challenged community if the formula is maintained. But that is an inherent design in this. The Appendix A provides a visual description of the distribution. I'll walk through that very quickly. First of all, the funds are distributed by fiscal year, and 64.83% is distributed to cities and towns, and a net 35.17% to counties. My observation there is these negotiations over the past 20 years have been rather intense, and I would describe that 0.83% versus 0.17% a illustration of the intensity of the conversations about the distribution. As Co-Chairman Bear indicated, the different parties, the counties, the state, and the municipalities. For municipalities, the direct distribution is a three-stage distribution. All municipalities receive either $35,000 or $15,000. And I hesitate to use names, but I will just put a name on this. This overall formula is often referred to as the Madden formula because he really did design some of the more complicated features of this. This flat amount is really modified heavily by former Senator Bebout. It is designed to assist counties with a number of small municipalities. So think Bighorn County, Cowley, Deaver, Franny, Byron, Burlington, Fremont County. Those municipalities benefit from this flat amount. Then the vast majority, 88% of the amounts that go to municipalities is through a proportional distribution. That is, again, a fairly complicated verbiage, but it's essentially taking their per capita sales tax and per capita ad valorem tax, inverting it, normalizing it, and then distributing funds on a per capita basis throughout the state. For municipalities, it is structured similar to their actual revenues. So their formula is based 75% on their collected sales tax and 25% on their property taxes. Municipalities rely a lot more on sales tax than they do on property taxes. For counties, that ratio is essentially reversed at 76% on property taxes and 24% on sales taxes.
Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Co-Chair. So this point that you're on right now, I think is something that we should go back and talk about what happened during the last session, because there was a bill that was addressing this issue, and there was much talk at that time of trying to use that bill that was going to adjust the sales tax distribution to basically be a backfill for the property tax reduction that did occur in the 2025 session. We were in a hurry to get a lot of things done, and we did not in the House pass that bill that had already passed the Senate because we did not want to mess up and come up with a formula that wasn't going to work. And this difference between sales tax and property tax between counties and cities is a significant mathematical thing that we have to take into account. And so trying to use a sales tax to replace a property tax is a bridge too far, I believe. So now because we did not do that in the last session, now we're able to just work on sales tax alone versus a distribution model that came out of the general fund on that direct distribution. So this should be much simpler than what we could have delved into in the last session. And so I just want to point that out to all the members of the committee. There was action that the Senate attempted to make during the last session, and there was an effort to try to make that a replacement for property tax losses to local governments. And it was just, it was very complicated to try to get that done in a short order. So we kept this property tax, dealt with that in the last session, and now we're going to deal with the sales tax. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, continuing on, let me add the third component for municipalities, and that is the revenue challenge distribution. And again, I hesitate to include names, but this is often referred to as the Rothfuss revenue challenged portion of the formula. What this does is it raises the lowest quartile of municipalities to that quartile level. And that means if you're just below the quartile level, you move up just a hair. If you're way below that quartile level, you get a sizable bump to get to that lowest quartile. This is actually, I would argue, is a fairly, it's an improvement to the prior model, prior to Senator Rothfuss's amendment, because prior to that time, it was a cliff at roughly that quartile level. And right around the June, July timeframe, Torrington, I can recall, Worland, were always right on the edge. And the calculation would either generate 100,000 or so for additional revenue or not. And they wouldn't know about this until toward the end of June, 1st of July. That cliff has been removed by this more smoothing approach. For counties, the formula is arguably easier. It's only a two-stage formula rather than a three-stage formula. There is no base amount. 95% of the money is distributed in a proportional distribution, very similar to the municipalities, but weighted heavily on property taxes rather than sales taxes, because that's what funds counties. And then there is a small assessed value adjustment, similar to the revenue challenge for cities and towns, but it uses the amount of revenue generated by 1 mil and compares that to $300,000 and then multiplies that by 3. This year, it just supported just the 6 lowest revenue counties, totaling just shy of $1.5 million. This formula here is...
I'm sorry, Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Can you explain why that multiplication factor of 3 is in there? That's something that I'm not familiar with as to why that is, and hopefully the committee can benefit from that.
Sure. And this portion of the formula was created under Chairman Madden when he was chairman of the Revenue Committee. I think a lot of it was due to available revenue, and 3 mills is essentially 1/4 of a county's 12 mills. So it didn't bring everybody up, for their full 12 mills. There was, prior to this, a similar formula for mill levy to support school districts. And there was an effort to equalize all mills across the state. And I think the legislature at the time recognized that you couldn't equalize all 12 of the mills with available revenues, but at least a quarter of them. It was an effort to bring those lowest quartile counties toward the median, but not all the way there, if you will.
So I hope the committee sees the complexity of trying to use a sales tax formula to replace or to somehow work with a property tax, because we have two different moving targets at all times, and we're trying to get them to balance out. And I guess my question for you, Mr. Richards, is when did Madden serve, and how long has this formula sort of worked? And you know, do we need to continue to adjust it on a every few years basis, or is it okay to leave a formula with two moving targets for a long period of time, in your opinion?
Mr. Chairman, this has been in effect. I think this will be the 12th or 6th biennium, the 12th year. I believe it initiated around 2014. There was a similar formula between 2004 to 2014, but it was not this one. We do, LSO staff, review this portion of the formula on the counties for two reasons every biennium. One is there is a, which I'm not speaking about because it gets real technical, there's actually a regression formula that looks at all total revenue and expenditures for all 23 counties. And I think we've only suggested a change on that once in the last decade. The $300,000 limit, I think there is some concern of leaving that in perpetuity because it would be eroded by inflation. So revisiting that at some interval, maybe not every 2 or 4 years, but at some interval would make some sense. And if I could, I know I'm going a little bit longer with my presentation than intended. If I could maybe offer a bit of support to Co-Chairman Bear's instincts about the issues related to property taxes. It's not just the actions the legislature takes relative to residential property, industrial property, commercial property, and mineral valuations play a significant impact. I don't have the numbers with me right now, but I believe there are 3 counties that actually increased their assessed valuation this year, despite the exemptions on residential property. Johnson County, I believe Niobrara County, and I suspect there is at least one more county, and that it speaks to the challenges of this, that an exemption on residential property or action by the legislature in one area does not mean that there is a net reduction in revenue. If trona prices are high or a wind project occurs, there are dynamics that are there that are beyond the policies. To see how your county or municipality fared, you can see that in attachment 3A for municipalities and attachment 3B for counties, or excuse me, counties are in 3A and cities and towns are in 3B. I would also comment here, for about a decade, from fiscal year 2007 through fiscal year 2016, there was a complement to this local government direct distribution formula, and it was often referred to as county consensus funding. Essentially block grants to the 23 counties intended largely for capital construction or other large one-time projects where a supermajority of the municipalities and the county had to agree on what projects those funds were going to be expended on. The history of those payments are included on page 6 in footnote 8, but you can see it was a sizable amount in some years, tens of millions of dollars, that were distributed through this direct county consensus funding rather than the direct distribution. On section 3, page 7, it provides a graphic regarding the major local government revenues with state involvement. This is all funds that generally go through the state. It does not include federal grants that the municipality or the county might have applied for and received separately. It does not include their local fees for sewer or water service. And it may not include some state agency grants that are not appropriated by the legislature. But broadly speaking, this is a great resource for local government revenue with state involvement. And you can see from 1989 or so through fiscal year 2008, it outpaced inflation. Since 2008, roughly the last 17 years, the amounts have been flat to declining. Despite a total increase in the absolute payment growth, it has not kept up with inflation. And then finally, on attachments 3A and 3B, this looks at the largest 3 revenue sources for most local governments on a per capita basis: sales and use taxes, ad valorem taxes, and the direct distribution. And if I could take just a quick moment to look at attachment 3A, you will see in column 4, it's 3A, attachment 3A. You can see in column 3, the direct distribution certainly favors the small and revenue challenged communities. You can see Hot Springs County receives 3 times the statewide average. Niobrara County receives almost more than 5 times the statewide average. Washakie and Weston County also are about 3 times the statewide average. However, when you move over to the final or last column, you can see that even with this effort to bring those revenue challenged or small population counties up to closer to their colleague counties, it does not. It does not bring them near what Sublette County, for example, on a per capita basis generates almost $6,000. It is an effort to provide some assistance, but it's nowhere near the large counties like large revenue generating counties like Teton, Sublette, Campbell, and the like. With that, Mr. Chairman, there are similar trends evident in the municipalities, and I would stand for any questions.
Questions from anyone? Any questions? Yes, Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don, just for the committee's knowledge, 1 cent of sales tax last year equaled dollars. How many?
Mr. Chairman, I think I've answered that question, but it is escaping me at the moment. I can get back to you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Any other questions? Yes, Co-Chairman Bear.
I think we can answer the question on attachment 2. Unless I'm reading this wrong, there's a 1% sales tax here for cities and towns distribution of 18 million. I don't know if that's just one portion of it or not. This would be on page 6 of attachment 2 is the year 2024 for last year.
Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, that is not the number, because that's the 1% sales tax that some counties impose and others do not. So it's not
Okay, so it's
a
not
statewide number.
Okay, darn it. Okay.
At the conclusion of the next speaker, I can interject if acceptable.
Oh, yes, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, Mr. Richards, if you could describe normalization. I believe I have a handle on that, but if you could explain how that works or what the formula is.
Yeah, so it is an attempt to look at not only the revenue collections within a particular county, but compared to all of the comparator municipalities and counties. And in order to do that, it takes the total revenue, divides it by the population. Pursuant to the Madden formula, we take an inverse of that, meaning 1 divided by whatever that net result is, and then compare all of those numbers to 1 or get to 100% and identify what 100% equals and then multiply that by the population. The effort is to recognize not only the absolute amount of revenue collections, but the relative changes each year in those revenue collections.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. But there's nothing in that normalization formula that, say, takes it over a span of 3 to 5 years or anything like that. It's strictly year to year.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pendergraft, yes. Technically, there is a 2-year delay. So FY26's payments are based on FY24's actual, and that is just based on the available data. We don't know 25's data by the time the 26 years, but it's a 1-year look back, 1 year removed.
Senator,
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Richards. How do we treat prisoners and students as far as population? Because it obviously skews the model some if you've got prisoners, and obviously UW, the student population is probably nearly as big as the town.
Mr. Chairman, all of the population is based on the most recent decennial census. And for the student population, I would describe that as split. A fair number of those students do become Laramie residents, but a fair number of the students maintain their residency for voting and other purposes in their home county, whether it is within the state of Wyoming or another state.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Rich. Appreciate it. Can I, do we have anyone from the Department of Revenue here? Please come on up. Welcome. Please introduce yourselves and get going on the overview.
Good morning, Mr. Co-Chairs, committee members. My name is Matt Sachet. I am the Mineral Tax Administrator with the Wyoming Department of Revenue, and I am currently acting as the Interim Director of the Department of Revenue. As you probably all know by now, Director Henson has retired, and we have tried to step into those sizable shoes to help her out. And I just wish to introduce myself, and I have provided each a card. That's my direct number. If you wish to continue to call Director Henson, you may, and it'll be forwarded to me. So if your number will still work. If you have any questions or any desires from the department, we'll be happy to get right on it. I would like to, if it's okay with the chairman, just to go over something a little off the property tax refund program. I'd just like to give an update on that, what's going on with that. This is as of Friday, we have received 14,911 applications. Currently, we've processed 7,312 and provided $7,398,000 in relief. So we have about 8.5 million remaining for the roughly other half. So it looks like we'll be able to cover it with what Director Henson requested last session. Just for your knowledge, every 1,000 applications is roughly $1 million in refunds. So if you have any questions about that or any questions about me, I'll be happy to answer them.
Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you for giving us that update, Mr. Sachet. I appreciate that. Can you give us any kind of information on denials for these applications? What kind of percentage you're looking at, or how many raw denials there have been since we've reached this high number of applications?
I'm sorry, I do not have that. Sorry, Mr. Co-Chair. I do not have that information. I can get it to you shortly. I'll just need to contact the administrator of the admin section who's doing that.
Follow up?
Since we've kind of gone down this path, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, of talking about a different subject. I just was curious if your office has gotten any kind of feedback on the change that we're going to see in both the 4% cap and the 25% reduction in regards to homeowner occupied, which is going to take place. That'll be a change in the following tax season from what we're in now. Have you had any kind of feedback from the public in that regard in your office?
Mr. Chairman, we have received some feedback from the counties, but not from the public as of right now. Mr. Gill keeps track of that very well, so I can provide you that information too if you would like it.
Any other questions? Okay, proceed.
Thank you, sir. I'll hand it over to the subject matter expert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Brett Fanning. I'm the Excise Tax Administrator at the Wyoming Department of Revenue. Again, truly appreciate Interim Director Sachet coming up with us to discuss some of these topics. He's got a wealth of mineral tax experience. And so it's fitting that we're here in Campbell County discussing those mineral tax and then having interim director available to answer any of those questions. So kind of getting back to sales tax on this piece, I do have a couple clarification points and follow up some of the questions that I've heard already this morning. And so when we I just want to give a brief example. So last night, the interim director and I had a fabulous meal here in the city of Gillette. And so I was charged 5% sales tax in Campbell County. And as we've mentioned before, that 5% is, so we've got this 4% sales tax. If I go and eat at a meal anywhere in the state of Wyoming, I'm going to be charged at least 4% sales tax. And then we've also got additional voter approved pennies that are throughout the state of Wyoming. So here in Campbell County, we've just got one additional penny. In Laramie County, we've got 2 additional pennies. In Teton County, we've now got 3 additional pennies. And so just focusing on the 4% sales tax, as was mentioned, some of that goes to the state of Wyoming, and then some of it goes back to our local partners, cities, towns, and counties. In last year's session, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, and the bill that was referencing updating the distribution model, I do think there is a little bit of confusion out there, and I do hear it from business owners in every one of your areas. So we've got this sales tax distribution that goes through the Department of Revenue. That's something that I deal with every single day. And then we've also got this additional distribution, as Mr. Richards did an incredible job of outlining. So we've kind of got these 2 distributions, as Mr. Co-Chairman, you were outlining earlier. And so that does create confusion among the constituents on, well, is this going into your Department of Revenue distribution, or is this going into the direct distribution that's divvied out by the legislature? And so I just want to make that point, because it is something that I hear from your business owners when they ask, well, how much did I contribute to my local community each year? And just something that I wanted to make note. Mr. Chairman, so in reference to a couple points, the tourism question that Mr. Co-Chairman had asked, the Department of Revenue does put out, we have distribution reports that relate to major NAICS codes, minor NAICS codes. And so those are broken out by business industries, depending on which report you want to take a look at. But as Mr. Richards outlined, there's some sort of calculation or math that needs to be done to figure out in-state versus out-of-state. And there's going to be different tourism figures in Teton County as there is to other additional lodging figures. So it's just something to note. We can track that per industry, but there is a calculation there to figure out in-state versus out-of-state. How much does a penny of sales tax raise? This was another question that came up, and I know that LSO and Mr. Richards will fact check me. Last fiscal year, that was approximately $243 million. So that's what 1 penny will raise. And we're not quite done with this fiscal year. We've just got a couple weeks left, so we're almost done. But I believe that projection is around $250 million. So if there were, if someone were to raise the sales tax by 1 penny, you're looking at about that $250 million. Mr. Co-Chairman, in referencing kind of the 1%, let me back up. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. So we've got all 23 counties have the 4% sales tax that goes into the distribution, 69. Then you've got an admin fee, and then the rest kind of go to our local share, cities, towns, and counties. Then we've got 21 out of 23 counties that actually have a 5th penny. So the vast majority of our counties have a 5th penny. The 2 that don't are Sublette County and Park County. And so looking at our distribution reports that the Department of Revenue puts out, that total 5th penny, again, 21 out of 23 counties, was worth $227 million. And so I've done that calculation several different ways to get to about that 240, 250. Because if 21 out of 23 bring in 227 million, you can start to get some of that gauge on what an additional penny is worth. Okay. With that, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, the Department of Revenue would stand for any questions that you may have related to the sales tax distribution.
Questions? Any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Senator Smith.
just one question. So what is the total revenue that comes in from sales tax to the state?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Smith, the total that comes into the state, just the state portion, I do have that figure with me. So, Mr. Chairman, the state sales tax portion, so the state sales tax portion last fiscal year was 609 million. And then the state portion of the use tax, again, fiscal year 2024, was 61 million. It's also important to note, Mr. Chairman, I think Senator Smith brought up a good question. On the distribution formula, we've got that carve out where there's a guaranteed distribution of a 1% in the state portion. There's also a guaranteed amount of the use tax as well. So there's 40,000 that's guaranteed to each county, and then there's 10,000 in use tax that's guaranteed to each county as well. And so if there were an effort to update the sales tax distribution formula, it might be worthwhile to look at the use tax statutes as well to make sure they align. And that's how our system is programmed for the most part, is sales and use tax are together. They are different types of taxes. They're both transaction taxes, and they generally go to the same fund, but it is something worthwhile if you're looking at 3915, that we probably should look at 3916 as well.
Okay. Anyone else? Any comments? I know there's a lot of numbers, a lot of understanding of this complex issue. Anything else that you'd like to comment on? Okay.
No, sir.
Yes, thank you for being here.
One question.
Yes,
Get out of there.
Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just looking at it and more just inquiring minds want to know, obviously looking at on the handout we got from Mr. Richard, yes, on 6.6, it's a little hot. Looking at our total sales and use tax of the 274 million and 19. Obviously, we saw the dip in 21, which we expect with COVID. And then we're up to 360 now. Do you think inflation is the driver? Obviously, population hasn't really changed. Do you think it's a deal where we're seeing that much more in our tourism? It just is really interesting to me that we're almost 100 million more in sales and use tax in that 5-year period. Just wondering if you guys have an idea what that driver is.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haroldson, yes, we do. And LSO and Mr. Richards did allude to some of this. It's a kind of the perfect storm in a sense. A lot of it is based on inflation. And sales tax is a transactional tax just based on the value. And so a bunch of that really is inflation. And I think there is also a graph in this handout that kind of tries to do a real versus nominal to see the growth in that, but it is primarily based on inflation. Inflation's twofold as well. So you've got increased prices, like I just noticed staying at a hotel room in Gillette or fill in the blank area is more expensive than it was pre-COVID. And part of that's inflation, prices have increased. And then part of that is also a demand factor as well. Even in our lodging tax distributions, we had almost record highs for several years. And now we're starting to see a trend where that's cooling off. Now, still not coming down to COVID levels, but sales tax is based on price. And when the prices go up, then the tax collections go up because it's based on a percentage of the price.
Yes. Senator Driscoll.
Thank you. A couple that you might not be able to answer right away. Number of exemptions we have to our sales taxes and estimated cost to us to give these exemptions, because some of them I know we can't even tell because we don't track it. But those two, second one, unrelated, how many auditors do we have and what do we find on compliance? Would we treat ourselves well to have a little beef up in the auditing department? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Driscoll, yes, exemption question. Right now, depending on how you count the exemptions, because they're in a couple different spots, even though we've got one section, it's generally 52 exemptions in the sales tax statutes. So we do have 14 imposition statutes. Imposition statutes tell you what vendors have to charge sales tax on. Then to those 14 impositions, we do have 52 exemptions for a variety of reasons. It could be political subdivisions, it could be use, it could be a variety of reasons why. So 14 impositions, 52 exemptions to those impositions. It's worth noting, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Senator, that in the state of Wyoming, we do have narrow imposition statutes. So those exemptions do not include things that are just not taxable. And so that includes services to real property, financial transactions, services to humans, just a variety of those things. So you've kind of got two different aspects there. You've got things that are taxable, but the legislature has decided to exempt them. And then you've got things that are just not taxable. So as far as related to the auditor question, Mr. Chairman, Senator, you've got knowledge on both aspects here because both the interim director and myself were members of the Department of Audit. And in Wyoming, we do have this really unique structure where our administrative agency, the Department of Revenue, is a separate agency from our Department of Audit. And so there's this unique relationship in statute. Not here to say if that's good or bad. That's not the intent of the answer. Generally, in the excise tax division, and I'll get you exact numbers, there's about 20 auditors. And so they're going to do roughly a couple hundred audits each year. Generally, the compliance ratio, which is something I track because I'm the one who actually signs those assessments, is in the 90 percentiles. But when you start doing percentages, that amount starts to creep up into a couple $1,000,000. And it varies each year depending on the type of audits. Generally, it's been my experience, both on both sides, that generally auditors do bring in money as compared to the cost to the state in general.
Any rough idea on the exemptions dollar amount? Just swag?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Driscoll, yes and no. The reason being, this was something I tried to do a year or two ago in one of my presentations to the Joint Revenue Committee. And when vendors report sales tax to us, there's a gross line, there's a total deduction line, and then it nets to a net taxable on the tax that they submit into us. What I had attempted to do was total up all of the deducted amounts. And that figure was one I don't want to say again, per se. It was in the billions of dollars. It was. But there were so many caveats when I went through that, it's really hard to tell. Some of the exemptions, you can really, if you look at their returns, you can really see what their exemption. Like, for example, we've talked about grocery stores. If I look at their returns, the vast majority of that is going to be exempted food. But then you've also got grocery stores that sell fuel. Fuel is also not subject to sales tax per an exemption in our statutes. And so just trying to decipher what the percentage of grocery store food versus fuel is can be complicated. And there's a variety of other scenarios where it makes it tough. But to answer your question, when I did the calculation a few years ago, the state of Wyoming basically exempts 2/3 of the sales that come through our office. So our exemptions are sizable. Mr. Chairman, Senator Driscoll, I've tried to pinpoint that figure, but there's just so many caveats in that calculation.
Mr. Chairman, Bob.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's incredible to find out that we're exempt in 2/3. That's thank you very much. Good information. I don't know if it'd take a statutory change. Would it be helpful if we went a little more in depth in our sales tax returns? I fill them out and I understand how they work. Should we be looking at getting where we can track this a little better so we actually have good information? Can you do that internally, or do we need a statute change to do that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Driscoll, we don't necessarily need a statute change for that. The statute says a vendor must file a true return based on the guidelines put forth by the Department of Revenue. So we do have that ability. I think if there were business owners in the room, they would be hesitant in trying to break out those exemptions. And what I say is that they're not necessarily not willing to do it. It's just that when you have 52 of them, that does create a challenge on what was exempted wholesale for resale, what was exempted because it was sold to a county, what was exempted because it was sold to a political subdivision, what was exempted because it's outbound freight. And to my knowledge, Wyoming's a streamlined state. The vast majority of states do not require that breakout just as a burden to business. To your point, though, Mr. Chairman, Senator Driscoll, is the Department of Revenue, even with my best IT skills to try and figure out that, haven't been able to. There once upon a time was a provision where a couple exemptions we tried to survey vendors and purchasers to try and actually see how much tax was forgone, but the Department of Revenue's response rate was not very good. And so we do have the ability in statute to likely break that out, but I think there would be some hesitancy based on the burden from your business owners.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see us pursue that just a little. I am one of those businesses, and this isn't the 1950s. We're computerized, and actually when you do the audit on me, I have to show all those exact things you're talking about. So to me, I don't think it is a huge burden, because when you go to an audit with you folks, you're going to ask UW tax exempt at a restaurant. If you're running a restaurant, show it. I for one think it's really important. Let's try to keep honest people honest and keep the liars at bay as best we can. Thank you.
Let me, yes, please come up. Apologies. You have some thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Kevin Hibbard. I'm the Director of the Wyoming State Budget Department. And I would just like to add a caveat to the increase in sales tax that we've experienced, wearing both hats of the co-chairman of Craig and the Director of the State Budget Department. We are in the process of completing $1 billion of federal funds through ARPA, which has an influence on that sales tax as well. And before that, there was CARES.
Thank you, Kevin. Any questions, comments? Thanks. Appreciate it. Anything else? Okay. Any questions? Good. So let me, yes, thank you. I do want to bring up some of our stakeholders, but before that, I do want to recognize, are there any elected officials or other state agencies that would like to come up and discuss this issue? Anyone? Okay, good. Wyoming Association of Municipalities and maybe the County Commissioners, Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Come on up. Welcome. Who'd like to go first? Please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Rima here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Very proud to be joined by my counterpart at the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. And we'll share the presentation this morning and look forward to your questions. First off, I want to thank you for entertaining this conversation. I think it's an important one, and I've enjoyed the discussion this morning. Mr. Chairman, I did provide a slide deck for you. I'll go through that and try and hit some highlights of it. I won't go through everything, but again, please stop if there are any questions. So on slide 2, I really provided a compilation of information you've already heard today. That 69% of the state 4% goes to the state. And in 2024, that was just over $670 million. Counties and municipalities do share 31%. It's important to note that 1% of that 31% does go towards administrative fees because the state is administering this tax for us before it's ultimately distributed.
I'm sorry, Representative, Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So this 1%, just so it's clear to this committee and the public, it's 1% of the 31%, correct?
Mr. Chairman, and I'll have Mr. Brett Fanning shake his head one way or the other, but yes, that is the way that it is supposed to break. It's not that the state actually gets 70%. It's 1% of the 31.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Chairman, on slide 3, I think it's important to kind of show you how this might tier if you were looking at the various counties. And this data that's on this slide shows county and municipalities within those jurisdictions. But if you look at that top group of 7 counties, and I'll just emphasize 7 counties are collecting 70% of all sales and use tax. And I could do this for property tax. I actually have those slides. It's pretty impressive what that looks like. So that means that those other 16 counties and their municipalities within their jurisdiction are sharing the other 30%. So sales and use tax collections in those jurisdictions are tough to come by sometimes. And that has an impact on their budgets. And of course, you can see the bottom 9 counties there. 9 counties
Comment,
are collecting 8%.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And I'm sorry that we've developed this system of interrupting, but I think it's really helpful if you guys present that we discuss the very things that you're bringing up. It actually shows we're paying attention to you. This what you have just illustrated really shows what Mr. Richards discussed earlier, and the overwhelming effect of minerals. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it is a considerable effect. And if you really broke this even further down, you would see that, particularly in a good year, Campbell County and the city of Gillette collect a considerable amount of the sales and use tax. And it's equipment, it's big pieces of machinery that drive a lot of that. So even if I broke this down further, you would see some other things start to pop out. Mr. Chairman, part of the reason that I show you this is that whatever solution we come up with really has to support the second and third tiers, those 16 counties that collect the majority share of sales and use tax. So in other words, you can't just use our traditional distribution formulas for supporting those communities. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley for slide 4.
One question, Co-Chairman.
Please. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Ryman, thank you for your slides here and answering my previous question, but your constituents, do you foresee them having heartache with the fact that those 7 are collecting in their communities these sales taxes, and yet what we're proposing is distributing it, and we've been doing, to these other 16 to equalize? Our Constitution requires that we do that for education. It does not require that we do that for cities, towns, and counties. So I'd just like some feedback from your constituents, both on the pay-in side, those who are receiving these massive amounts of taxes, and the receiving end. I expect it's very positive from those, but just a little bit of anecdotal evidence of what these counties are saying as far as moving the sales tax from where it's generated to where it's not.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and a great question. What I would share with you is that counties in general are not looking for there to be a recapture model that redistributes county-generated revenues back to other counties. But I don't think that you find that in what we're discussing here today and the proposal that we'll discuss here in a minute, because those revenues are currently being taken from the place that they're generated and being sent to the state coffers, the state general fund. So if there's any sort of place that we're interested in going is saying, would you share a little bit more of that back at the local level with communities? And so that would be my answer.
Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And that is essentially what we're talking about doing here. If we're going to change the 69-31 split to some other number, it would be to benefit those local governments. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Ashley Harpstreet with Wyoming Association of Municipalities. Just to put a finer point on that last slide that Mr. Ryman was just on, first-class cities in Wyoming that is 4,000 in population or more, there's 19 of the 99. So I'm just going to show you the discrepancy here. If you look at what's 1,000 or less, that equates for 73 of our municipalities, with Mr. Chairman Du Bois being number 44, one of my favorite towns. And yeah, Co-Chairman Gillette being number 3 most populated, just to kind of get some texture around what we're talking about, what sizes.
Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Ms. Harpsworth, where does Wright fall in? That's important to me.
Right. It is actually above 1,644, so they are number 34 in population. I will send you on this chart. I apologize for not thinking ahead about this, but I'll make sure you get a copy of that. So next slide with local sales and use tax, the so-called 5th, 6th, and 7th pennies. Jeremiah and I do not like to refer to them as that because there's 3 options. A county can put on up to 7 pennies, and only one county does that currently, and that is Mr. Chairman, Senator Garu's county, the home of Teton County. So only one county takes advantage of that, and we spoke about this earlier with Department of Revenue stealing our thunder. 21 of the 23 have that general purpose penny, otherwise sometimes lovingly referred to as the 5th penny. 10 of the 23 have a specific purpose penny, and that is very specific in statute of how they're able to expend those funds. And that is time specific. So as soon as the project is accomplished, those roll off, and those cannot exceed 2 pennies. And then 2 counties have an economic development fractional, or have had an economic development penny. And those can go in quarter penny economic or increments. That's Goshen County, which Mr. Chairman, that's Representative Smith's home county. And then also, Mr. Chairman, Fremont County, of course, had that half penny increment. The statute does allow for the community to design what that looks like for each community. And Goshen has been very successful, I think, in putting that back out.
Co-Chairman Bear.
So I think you were just explaining what I was going to ask. So you used the word had. So just to be clear, Fremont County has eliminated or still has that, but Goshen County has eliminated it. Is that what-
Opposite, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so we continue to have that quarter penny for economic development in Goshen County.
Correct.
Give us a little background on the Fremont County, why they've eliminated that now.
Mr. Chairman, and I would actually rely on you too, maybe for some local feeling on it. But as I understand it, they put a half penny on, and it's up to any of these pennies. Is the beauty of it is the community can decide the right size for them, and it sounds like they put it to some projects, and some of the community members were not excited about what they were putting it to, and they decided to discontinue its use for that specific purpose. Does that help summarize, Mr. Chairman?
I'll go with that for right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And it helped me as well. I know in our community here, we've rejected that quarter penny. I think it was probably 7 or 8 years ago. Can you give us, I don't know if you have this available now, but I'd like to know, how many attempts have there been across the state to implement an economic development sales tax? And then how many have those been? Obviously, all but 2 have ever been rejected, but if you could give me an idea, appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Bear, I believe about a half a dozen. I think the big 3 were Campbell, Fremont, Goshen, of course, has been back on, and we'll try to do a little survey and see how many more.
Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for you guys, just to make sure I got my head wrapped around it. So the 5th penny is basically a one-time vote, correct? Or is that the committee? Or is that how's that one assessed in? Because obviously, like Platt's got the 5th penny. The 6th is a decision that's made on a regular basis for a specific purpose. And then the 7th is only allowed for this economic development. Am I following that right? Could you give that clarification for me?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harrelson, I'm going to rely on my colleague here as well. This is why we avoid 5th, 6th, and 7th, because there's actually a couple of different combinations, and the next slide is going to have another combination. So the big thing to remember is you can have up to 7. The general purpose, I believe in statute that the commissioners can memorialize that, but I would say for most of them, they put it back out to the voters. Mr. Ryman.
Yeah.
General purpose. Yeah.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. If I could just add a little bit more texture to it. So the general purpose, there are really kind of 3 options that exist. And these have evolved over time. Initially, it was that you could put it up to the voters continuous, at the time, it was every 2 years. About 5 years ago, we extended that to 4-year terms. And as part of the initial establishment of this general purpose, you all put in place a provision that allowed, after it was voted on by the voters, then the county commissioners, with the support of the municipalities in that jurisdiction, could impose that fifth or the general permanently. And I will tell you, there are a small handful of historically really conservative counties that have done that. Right. And what you also did a few years ago, at the same time we extended from 2 to 4, is that you allowed for the voters to consider making it permanent. That's only been taken up as a vote once in the state of Wyoming since that time. That was in Albany County, and the voters rejected that. So those commissioners have to bring that general purpose penny back to the ballot every 4 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just thank you for the general purpose, the special or the sixth. Now talk about that other one. Give me the fill in on that one. Obviously, we see it with quarter-cent, half-cent economic development. Is that only an economic development push? Could you explain that one for me, please?
Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure I understand. So is the question, can those be made permanent? Or what is their percentage? Specific purpose, you have to put it out to the voters and specifically state what you intend to utilize those funds for. So that's why it's time specific. Once you've collected those funds, it goes off of the collection, which can happen midstream, between an election. Economic development, you again have to identify the specific economic development activities that you intend to utilize those funds, put it up to the voters, and that's time specific. It's generally time specific to, voting period. So, maybe a 2-year period.
Mr. Chairman, carrying on to the municipal option, not an eighth penny, but could be used in the 7-penny mix. If a county has imposed at least 1 penny general purpose and has approved or continued a specific purpose, then a municipality may consider a municipal option tax. So there'll be a test on this later, but there are some parameters that the county commissioners made sure that was very tight when we passed this law a couple years ago. It can be a quarter-penny increments, not to exceed a penny for general purpose or a specific purpose, and it cannot collect more than the municipality would collect under a countywide specific purpose tax. They may use, again, for general or specific purpose. Alternatively, if no countywide general or specific purpose is imposed, the county commissioners may grant authorization for a municipality to propose that municipal option tax. County commissioners establish that maximum taxation rate, and it can go in that quarter-penny increments, and then the authorization terminates after 2 years. City of Casper successfully just was the first community to pass this. This is just pretty new on the books, about 2 years, I think, just a couple of years old. And so with their measures, I've done a lot of education with the City of Casper and members of the legislative body, specifically Natrona County legislators, of when they marketed this to their constituents, they asked the constituents what they wanted. And so, for example, they funded an animal shelter, but that was what the constituents wanted on the ballot. Now, they rejected certain measures that were on there. So theirs was very granular, very specific, looking for municipal feedback.
Representative Alleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, but I'd like to, comment on this a little bit. 27% of the people in Natrona County live outside of Casper, but yet there's 6 communities in Natrona County that have city commissions. But only one voted on these taxes, which is Casper. and these other 6 communities do not have services. So the 27% of the people who were not allowed to vote on this are paying those taxes, and they're very unhappy about it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what the question was there.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So I want to jump into a proposal that we would have for you, and that's a mechanism to memorialize direct distribution. So we're not back here every 2 years ribbing you for that funding. And it really is a conversation for us that started with Senator French proposing Senate File 60 last legislative session, which looked to distribute an additional 4% of the state portion of sales and use tax back to local jurisdictions. So going to slide 7, why would we do this? You've heard conversation about some of the erosion of local taxes or taxing authority with federal mineral royalties back in the early 2000s. You've heard about consensus grants, which haven't been a thing in my entirety of tenure at the County Commissioners Association. We had, of course, grocery tax and property tax reductions more recently. It's also important, as you heard today, that direct distribution has been authorized in some form or fashion by you since 2004. So we've kind of normalized that this is an important resource to ensure that our local governments can provide the services that you've directed us to provide for 21 years. So perhaps it's time to just find a way to memorialize it. And in some ways, and I think this goes to the good co-chairman's comment, right now, a lot of that tax is generated in our local communities, but we're sending it back to the state general fund. So are we sort of disincentivizing local communities to actually invest in economic development and make sure that resources stay locally? So going to slide 8, I've indicated a few things that whatever solution we select has to do. The first one is we can't have any more tiering. We have to find a way to support those second and third tier communities. And second there.
Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So when you make the statement, and I read it on your slide earlier, that you don't want to have any more tiering, I interpreted that as we have 3 tiers. You don't want to see it 4, 5, 6. Just keep it 3 tiers or fewer as we make these adjustments.
Yeah, Mr.
Am I hearing you correctly?
Mr. Chairman, certainly I don't want to add additional tiers, but I think the real point is we want to try and support those second and third tier counties. Of course, I represent all of them. I want to make sure that the communities and counties in that upper tier continue to receive support, but they generally have other taxing mechanisms that support the revenues that they generate. Property taxes, again, if I showed you a property tax side by side, the vast majority of the counties would be very similar in that. So they have more taxing authority in that upper tier. I'm trying to find a way, how do we support those lowers? And that's frankly what direct distribution does. That's why we have the hardship community component in that. So that's really what that's about, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I put in there, we've got to minimize the incentive for voters to reject local options at the expense of smaller municipalities and counties. So we can't crowd out that particular area. And then, of course, we have to maintain the critical balance between cities, towns, and counties. And what I mean by that is that, and you heard this earlier, property taxes favor counties and sales and use tax favor municipalities. So if you're using sales and use tax to make up for lost property tax revenue, you've got to be very creative in how you do that, because the beneficiaries of that tax are not necessarily the same. So, Mr. Chairman, going to slide 9, what is our proposal? The first part of the proposal is keep that 31% exactly as it sits today. Don't make any changes to it. It works. What we're asking you to do is to take 8% of the state share and run that through the direct distribution model to provide direct distribution to local governments. What that equates to, or let me back up, House Bill 70 in 2024, which was your direct distribution bill, distributes $73.125 million annually to cities, towns, and counties for direct distribution. The 8% proposal that I'm providing you today generally allocates $77 million based on 2024 figures. So 8% is roughly equal to what you're currently distributing. I say roughly because if you're really trying to get down to it, it's about 7.5-ish percent, 7.7%. So it's a little bit higher. But
Co-Chairman
there's
Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So this 73.125 or 77 based on a new formula is based on the latest distribution. And I remember the debate vividly, where we increased from what had been routinely somewhere around 105 to 110 million in a biennium, in other words, about 55 million, to 146 million. It was late at night, and it was argued that local towns were suffering at the end of COVID. We can see historically, if we look at revenue, that property tax increases over that same period of time and sales tax increases based on inflation, which we just heard testimony on both of those issues from the Department of Revenue, really belies that issue. Now, you could also agree, argue that local governments suffer from inflation as well. But that was supposed to be a one-time thing, that increase from 110 million roughly, which had served us for over a decade, to 146 million. And it was to get those local governments through a rough time. We've seen that maybe that argument wasn't really as valid as we heard it based on increased revenues through all of our normal processes. So what is your argument to justify this additional $20 million per year?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I wish I had the numbers immediately at my fingertips. I believe that they're in, Mr. Richards' presentation. But if you go back and look historically at direct distribution, it was at a much higher level than the $105 million. The $105 million was a decision made out of a number of different cuts that needed to be adjusted across both the state budget and local budgets in order to accommodate. And we stayed at that 105 for, was it about 3 biennia before you provided some initial monies to start inching that up on the back end of 1 biennium. And then, of course, as you mentioned, a couple of years ago, you increased that. I think part of that was to continue to provide support back locally, but I think part of it was to try and correct and begin to distribute back in line with historic distributions. I don't dispute the fact that there were increases in terms of property taxes, but I also, again, you have to remember, we're not talking about the same distribution, the same beneficiaries of that. So, there were counties that saw greater increases in property taxes than many others. Direct distribution is there to support those second and third tier counties. Niobrara County, throughout the entirety of those increases in property taxes, saw an additional $43,000. Direct distribution is there to help them through these sorts of transitions where with your reductions, you've now eroded them back to where they started despite inflation and everything else. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'll try and be quick here. So what's the benefit? First off, the proposal doesn't raise taxes. We're carving out a portion of the state portion of sales and use tax. It generally has little impact on state revenues. I'll concede there's a little bit because my 8% is slightly above the 7 point whatever. And of course, over time, there will be additional revenues that will come to local governments. And so I think that's one of the benefits is that you're allowing for some growth potential in the direct distribution model rather than us having to look at erosions. But again, we will share with the increases, we'll share with the decreases in sales and use taxes over time. And then, of course, it eliminates the biennial wrangling over direct distribution. Mr. Chairman, because it came up a bit in the conversation earlier over the Madden formula, I want to make it very clear that on the county side, we're not necessarily looking for a change in the Madden formula. That was a long drawn out compromise amongst counties and on the county side of that equation many years ago. In fact, my predecessor, Pete Obermuller, was fond of talking about his apology tour going out to a few counties who ultimately lost in that equation, but we're supportive of where it's at. I will say I've tried to break the Madden formula a few times over my years in this office. I've not been successful in that effort. And I'll just point out one area that I've tried to do that because it came up. There was some conversation about hardship counties. Historically, there have been about 6 to 8 counties that fall into that hardship category. And I'll just quickly mention them. They're Bighorn, Crook, Goshen, Hot Springs, Niobrara, Platte, Washakie, and Weston. Now, in any one given year, as you heard, a county can slip out of that hardship status. You heard about the $300,000 per mill. I have 3 counties that are kind of teetering around that edge, and it's part of why I looked at, could we move it up to 400,000? It didn't work. Those 3 counties, just for your information, are Bighorn, Crook, and Goshen. So in 2023, Bighorn and Crook moved out of hardship status. Now I understand from the commissioners that Crook is back into hardship status. Goshen, it was at $297,000 per mill in 2023. So they're within 3,000 of going out of hardship. And that again, can hurt them in terms of direct distribution. The upside is they saw increases somewhere else in the equation, right? And that's what we want to see. So I say all that to say we don't necessarily at the county side look for a change in the Madden formula at this point in time. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will turn it over to my colleague.
Let me recognize Co-Chairman Bear.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Mr. Ryman, thank you for your presentation and thank you for bringing an idea that you'd like to see implemented. So just to reiterate what you said, you'd like to see us go to 6139 and you'd like to not mess with any of the formula that applied to the previous 31 and yet distribute this additional 8% in a way that we all come up with a formula that works. Have you looked at the idea of just applying the Madden formula and all the other caveats that we have in it to this 8%? What kind of issues do we run into in that regard? I know that when we discussed this during session, there were major issues because we were trying to replace a property tax and that was not going to work. Now we're not doing that. We're just continuing and we're trying to deal with the direct distribution. Can it be done by simply applying the Madden formula to this 8% that you're suggesting?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Bear, we think it works because it eliminates our two parties having to argue over where it should be distributed. We know what the Madden formula looks like. Historically, if you look at the overall breakdown of sales and use tax to locals, that 31%, it generally breaks out the way that the direct distribution model assigns the first tranches of money. So I think it's really an upside for us to go down. If you go towards trying to replace property taxes, that's where we're going to run into a whole lot of issues because, again, the beneficiaries are different. With sales and use tax, you're really just talking about the two of our parties. If you're talking about property taxes, now you've got schools, you've got the counties, you've got the municipalities, you've got special districts. And right now, municipalities under property tax get 2% of that. Under sales and use tax, they're getting about 69, 2/3 of that. So you end up in lots of problems if you start trying to figure out how to work out property taxes using sales and use taxes.
Thank you for the follow-up, Mr. Chairman. But wouldn't it be great if we could have a Smith formula? Because there's two members on this committee named Smith.
Chairman, I would do whatever I could to support assigning a name to any of this, to any of you, if it would help us get this across the finish line.
Mr. Chairman, just on that last slide before, or the past slide before we go to the last slide, I think the biggest thing here is to provide certainty in the roller coaster environment that we've been in for our local governments, that between the two of us, we serve 100% of the population in the state of Wyoming. And all we're trying to do here is help them help themselves serve their residents and constituents. So the final considerations we have for you is looking at the increase of local sales and use tax distribution. Some of that had already been discussed with some of the previous speakers, but I think the biggest thing you can look at is consider reducing or eliminating various sales and use tax exemptions, with over 50 of them on the books. Looking at a low and broad-based system is very sound tax policy. There was a working group that was put together by the former Director of Revenue 2 years ago, and we made some pretty good headway, but unfortunately it kind of fizzled out with some of the other politics going on. But I would love to be part of that working group again and talk through some of the scenarios of the exemptions.
So give me a couple examples of exemptions you'd like taken off.
Mr. Chairman, for example, one to consider would be looking at, and this is a very small one, but on newspapers, they were exempted because we used to put a quarter into a machine, right? And you couldn't do like 25 cents plus 2 cents or, and break it up. So there was some that was just functionality, but now in a digital world, a newspaper, there's a subscription on it that it's going to be all digital at this point. There's things like you can just philosophically think about. If you go buy a lawnmower, you're going to pay sales tax on the lawn, on the mower. But if you have a lawn service come, there's no tax on the same ending of what you're trying to accomplish. Same with the picture. You take a picture, you pay for the picture, you get taxed on the final product, but then if a photographer comes and takes senior pictures or portraits of your family, there's no taxation on services. So that would be, it's going to cause a war because it's a tax increase, fair warning. And I think the exemption committee was really valuable because the whole point of some of these economic development incentives is to make sure you're lifting the base. But if it's not lifting the base, and the previous speaker from Department of Revenue spoke about, they had surveys out there, but the businesses weren't responding. And in my mind, if I'm getting hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars in exemptions, it would be worth creating that report back. There's also, some exemptions that got put in because of a political nature, but with no sunset or, looking at why and if this is still working. I know the manufacturing exemption is one that is proven out to pencil out for lifting our base. And we are absolutely in support of that. But those that are on the system that aren't penciling out, I think it's time to re-examine, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I agree with your suggestion, but isn't the Revenue Committee now working on this very issue?
Like,
I do believe that they have taken on exemptions as one of their interim topics and that they're trying to, I don't think this committee is really prepared to work on exemptions. And I would just make this comment as well, as far as those companies not giving the feedback, it's really the public that pays the tax. It's a pass through those companies. So other than if the tax was really significantly changing the price of their product, they're probably not affected one way or another. There's maybe a little less paperwork. Yeah, these exemptions do create difficulty. I wanted, since we're talking about the revenue department, you brought it up. One of the comments that Mr. Fanning shared with us is that there's confusion amongst the businesses between the sales tax that they're submitting and how that comes back to their community versus the direct distribution coming out of the general fund of the state. So within your constituency, do you believe that this is going to really significantly simplify things if we just apply the Madden formula to an additional 8% and we no longer have a direct distribution? Do you see that simplifying things for cities, the counties, as well as the general public?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman Bear, I would agree with Mr. Ryman's previous statement. And when I talked about the numbers of our communities, with 20 of our, 19 only being first class and then the rest of them being little guys, 80% of my membership is going to fall into that smaller category, especially with the removal of tax on groceries. Most of our main streets have a grocery store on them, and that was the big driver of sales tax for them. So that really crippled them. So I would say even, some of my larger communities in the room are supportive of a robust system in the state. I would want to keep it limited to where it's at, because I think sales tax is a unique opportunity for our communities that are thriving and pushing economic development and growth. And they have more money, more problems, more services, more people. So they have to be able to take care of those larger pieces. But I think this is a solution that provides a fair way to come back from sitting in your hard chairs in Joint Appropriations Committee that I've commented on sometimes.
I'd like you to explain a little further two of your comments now. The hard chairs, we need to understand what you mean by that. I can think of a couple of things that might mean, but you said keep it where it's at. Please explain what you meant by that.
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Bear, as far as we'd like to look at that proposal that brings us to 77 million per year, so the 8%, and then meeting us at that direct distribution number. And we'll get you those numbers of showing this wasn't, in our opinion, a one-time boost of the 145 million, because when you start looking at the consensus block grant funding that we had or other mechanisms, right? We also didn't bring up not just the elimination of food tax, but there was a reduction in severance tax and the caps for local communities. And that actually was, from what I understand as I've dug into this as a tax nerd, in the beginning of the 2000s, of looking at direct distributions to get us off the caps when they lowered it on us. And then the elimination of the food tax really sealed the deal for direct distribution. As far as your hard chairs, they're very uncomfortable in Joint Appropriations Committee, and we've commented about that several times. And we would just like to spend our time on working for more solutions than coming to beg for money. to be quite frank, every 2 years.
Mr. Chairman, can I just provide an example on this? So I'll just use one of my counties to help you, to maybe help illustrate the benefit of doing something like this. So Washakie County, I think they have a budget of about $13 million for their county. 25% of their budget is made up of 3 revenue sources. One is direct distribution. The second and third are secure rural schools and payment in lieu of taxes. Those are 2 discretionary programs of the federal government to replace, taxes that they otherwise can't collect on federal lands. All 3 of those are discretionary programs. So that means 25% of their $13 million budget, and they're looking at, decommissioning roads right now because of how thin of their margins are again, discretionary programs. If you took this approach, you're now taking direct distribution out of that equation for them. And you're now saying you can count on the fact that you're going to get some form of direct distribution through this particular allocation. And that would go a long way. And I will say, if you're thinking about how discretionary are those federal programs, well, one of them went to 0 this year. And there's no guarantee we're going to get it through. In fact, I gave our counties a revenue estimate that they shouldn't count on that program. So they're already going to take a haircut on one of those. So anyway, you're giving them a little bit more confidence for a county like that.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Ryman, thank you for that illustration. That's helpful. Ms. Harpstra, the grocery tax, we've talked about it a lot. That's really how we got onto this path. One of the things we haven't discussed is a comparison between, what that grocery tax was, what it would be. I don't know if we have the ability to know what it would be today, and what this direct distribution is today. Do you have any information?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Bear, I do not. That would be a Department of Revenue, and it'd be, I think, hard for him to guess. But I can tell you that I know that there was comments about it being regressive. Sales and use tax can be regressive by nature, but with food tax specifically, according to the Tax Foundation, they believe it's not, because there are so many programs set up with SNAP and food programs for those in need to have an avenue to get food.
Yes.
First of all, Mr. Fanning, if there's any information later on, I'd like you to come up and provide that in that regard. And I'm going to make a statement here about regressive grocery taxes. Your point is well taken regarding assistance programs, both through the state and federal government. But it's not just the poorest of the poor that are affected by taxation, especially regressive taxes. It's the lower middle class. It's the middle class itself, which is being eroded every day in our culture. So we as governments, government entities, have to appreciate the American dream and the American ideal of a middle class, a robust middle class. And, if we can lift the bottom half of that, we need to. And I believe that our predecessors that got rid of a grocery tax were doing the right thing in that regard. Really, those people who are net gainers from taxes of any kind, they're kind of off the table when I make that comment. But wouldn't you agree?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Baird, just to gently push back is, we are so fortunate to live in a state that we have mineral wealth. And I truly believe that we don't pay for what we receive. I worked as a former director with Wyoming Taxpayers Association, where we built a tool called the Cowboy Family, and it showed all the inputs of what we put in and what we get out. And I can tell you, we are doging ourselves every day. I would love a hat, because I just had a convention on that. We are looking internally, where can we streamline? We are like that by nature in Wyoming. I believe we all are that way. But we have an economies to scale. And I have some speakers behind me that will talk about serving towns of 100 because they're incorporated because of a water system, right? And it costs the same in Edgerton that will come up to Wright to Gillette. Unfortunately, that's the cost of doing business. And whether or not you believe that they should be incorporated or not, at the end of the day, there's people that live there. And if they decide to unincorporate, where does this problem lie and who's going to pay for it? Because the 100 residents probably won't be able to pay for it. So I don't know. I just opened a can of worms.
Yes, we did. But I will agree with your last statement there in regards to small governments needing some help, because the cost of operating those governments is well beyond what the population can maintain. And I think that this committee is committed to that. Myself, for sure, I can state that. But into your comment about, the taxpayers, the citizens of Wyoming being net gainers across the board, I'm going to push back on you on that, because all of those minerals, number one, they belong to those people. It is ours as a group of citizens that make up the state. The state is not just land, it's also the people that live here. So we own those minerals, so we're paying the taxes on those minerals. But I would say, even if you took that argument off the table, we still pay. Every product that comes off of those minerals, if it's shipped out of state and it's consumed to make energy in another state, that energy is used to create products that we purchase back here in this state. So every product we purchase, every piece of energy, every electric bill that we pay, we do pay for increased mineral costs that comes from taxation, because those mineral companies, that's a fixed cost. They can't adjust for that anytime we tax those things. So where the math lies as far as how much we gain versus how much we pay, I would argue that it's not nearly what it is if you just take minerals off the plate. So kindly push back on that argument. We can continue to debate that another time, but thank you for bringing it up and letting me say that. Wouldn't you agree?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Bear, I believe that at the end of the day, the former Director of Revenue had a really powerful statement. And that was, the purpose of taxes is to pull our resources to pay for things we cannot afford on our own. And at the end of the day, Edgerton is going to come up and talk about their cost of services. And unfortunately, they can't crowdfund what they need to crowdfund. Either can your backyard, Representative Almond, we're trying to figure out, how do we help these small communities? And it comes down to a policy decision. Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the guy behind the tree. So who do we tax? How do we pay for these services? We're not trying to get rich. We're just trying to help our residents and constituents. And so we very much appreciate this conversation and want to be a good partner with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for bringing up Edgerton. But it is not a small town who was developed because of needing services. It was a town that was developed because at one time the world's largest oil field surrounded it. And today they're starving to death. And I'm going to invite everybody here on July 15th. Edgerton will be 100 years old, and we're going to have a celebration. And I invite you all to be there. And I thank you very much.
Okay, we're getting near the top of the hour for a break, and I do want to give some time for public comment before we break. So appreciate, obviously after the break, we'll have more time. Is there anyone here in person that would like to comment on what you've heard so far? Yes.
Commissioner.
County Commissioner. Please, both of you come up. You're both welcome to come up. Welcome. Good to see both of you. Whoever would like to go first.
Oh, yeah. Okay, she kind of put me on the spot. My name is Laura Krebs. I am from the town of Edgerton. It's nice to meet you, Chairman, and committee. I just really quick, Bill, I'm so sorry. I needed to correct you. We are having our 100-year celebration, but it is actually July 12th. July 12th. You are welcome. Right? So I'm not a very good public speaker. So I
That happens.
actually wrote out something that I'm gonna read to you, and I hope I don't seem to dial like on paper, okay? I stand before you on the behalf of Town of Edgerton, a small, deeply resilient community in Wyoming, proudly celebrating its 100th year. This centennial is a powerful reminder of what small towns have accomplished through grit, collaboration, and perseverance. Edgerton was built on the strength of its people, individuals who work together to build infrastructure, support families, and create a sense of belongings that has endured across generations. Yet, as we celebrate this milestone, we also confront critical questions about our future. Despite our size, we continue to face the same core obligations as larger municipalities: infrastructure maintenance, essential services, public safety, and community development. The difference is we shoulder these responsibilities with fewer people, fewer resources, and far less margin of error. That is why I'm here today, not only to honor Edgerton's legacy, but to request your partnership and support as we work to ensure certainty for our next 100 years. We are asking for legislative foresight that acknowledges the unique challenges of rural municipalities. We are asking for the policies that allow towns like Edgerton to sustain critical infrastructure access, equitable funding, and plan confidently for the future. We don't expect special treatment. We only ask for the framework that recognizes rural area resilience and that empowers us to turn this resilience into long-term sustainability. I urge you to consider legislation that streamlines access to infrastructure grants and modernization programs, rules set-asides and funding formulas for roads, broadband, and water systems, incentives for regional collaboration to reduce overhead and increase impact, support for workforce development initiatives that attract and retain skilled professionals in rural areas. What we seek is certainty that we can meet our needs of our residents, remain competitive, and preserve the small town values that make Wyoming strong. Let this centennial be more than a celebration of Edgerton's past. Let it be a beginning of a renewed partnership, a signal that rural Wyoming is not only remembered, but prioritized. Thank you for your time, your service, and your commitment to the communities like mine. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that statement. Any questions? Comments? Senator Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Absolutely love your town. I've spent
Thank
a
you.
lot of nights in the motel when it was open there and a lot of time there. We spray weeds for the oil field there. Your thoughts on your ability to raise revenue rather than have us hand it to you? I'm one of the ones, and a little bit of the statement from the chairman, what we had is, I think it's really easy to, basically we're cutting up slices of pie and it's figuring out where you move them to. And I'm a big believer we've really tied the hands of our communities and our counties in the fact that even when they want to, they have no ability to raise revenue. And I understand the dreaded T word, everybody goes crazy, but different areas and businesses have the ability. What would your thoughts be in to give you the chance, like the 1 cent is either a grocery tax or something that you guys voted on locally, enacted locally, and in particular on a grocery tax being regressive? We already have the ability to make those people that really are in need tax-free. I guess to me, I'd like some thoughts on it, because I've watched our local communities where I live up Devil's Tower, but Hewlett, grocery tax is one of the big drivers in the town. It's exempt. You go to Sundance, groceries are exempt. The equipment dealer, which is one of the big ones, all the ag equipment's exempt. I really believe in giving you tools. What tools could we give you to help you get there that your people actually supported and bought into? Thank
Well,
you.
actually, bringing up the hotel, I actually did have a gentleman, he purchased the hotel. He purchased a hotel and he's remodeling it and he's fixing it up, and hopefully we can use that as another revenue source that we used to before. We also have a gentleman, we're getting some growth in Edgerton. He's from Washington. He's a retired Marine. He chose our little town. We have a little warehouse outlet that's down there on the Highway 387. He purchased that, and he wants to make it into a gun shop, which he's in the right town for because everybody there owns a gun. So just help in moving that along. We also have a gentleman that, purchased a restaurant there that's right there on the corner of the 387 and Second. So people, they're getting brave. They're getting brave to put their money into these businesses, and they're, hopefully it'll come back to the communities in more ways than one. And, it's actually incredible to see that, just since I've been there, because I haven't even been with Edgerton for 2 years yet. But since I've been with Edgerton, it's incredible to see the growth and to see, when you talk to the people and you ask them what are their concerns, what do you want? How can we help you? They're not quiet. They're not quiet. And they let me know. So that's why I'm here to represent them. And it's not just about Edgerton. It's about all small communities. And I understand how the census thing is done every, 10 years, but all of us within just this 5 years of being census, we've all grown. We've all grown. So I just like to ask consideration for that extra growth that each one of us has sustained with this last 5 years since census.
Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you for being here, and you did an excellent job. So
Thank you.
don't say that about your public speaking. You did well.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one question. Would you prefer an Alamand formula to a small formula?
I don't know. Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Thank you again for your testimony. Appreciate that, your comments. Commissioner Scott Clem, good to see you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I want to comment specifically to the memorializing the direct distribution and I'm very supportive of that idea. I think this is something more akin to low-hanging fruit, honestly. I mean, there are more difficult issues, particularly when you're talking about trying to either make permanent, some of the property tax exemptions for residential folks, or even to eliminate that or make that, do away with that altogether. That's where it's really tricky. And it was mentioned just a moment ago, but I like this idea. Prior to the Madden formula, and I was a part of all that. I remember all of that debate on the floor and all how that all went. I don't think there was probably a vision of how we could actually make this happen, because it really does go back, and it's been mentioned here, as far as the grocery tax. And I agree. I think that is regressive. In all honesty, it would affect people like me. Like, I'm not like dead dirt poor, but it would directly impact me, even the option of it. So I would be opposed to that. I wouldn't even want there to be an option. Stay away from it. But I do like this idea of how do we memorialize this? How do we make this concrete going forward? And I like this idea of this distribution, the 61-39 split. Again, I think that's more low-hanging fruit. Where it gets a little bit trickier is, if you're going to talk more than that. Of course, as a county, I would love to see that distribution formula change even more, right? But that goes in, if we're going to talk beyond that, now we're talking about dollars that actually you guys touch, prior to today, we've been talking about residential property tax and all that kind of stuff, property taxes just in general, right? Obviously you spend school dollars, but it hasn't really affected your revenues, right? Because the state doesn't rely upon that. It relies upon sales tax. And now we're actually talking about dollars that you touch. How much are you willing to say, we're not going to put this in savings, but we're actually going to do something different, right? And that's a tougher conversation, particularly for all of you. How much do you want to let go of? How much do you want to reduce? And that kind of a thing. I do want to bring this up, and I know it's not, this is something that the Revenue Committee is looking at, and I was here at the last Revenue Committee. It was here in Gillette, and there was a proposal, and I take it as serious to try to eliminate residential property tax. That's something that you all will need to be aware of. And it was mentioned a moment ago as far as, how do you, it's easy when we're talking about cities and counties as far as the distribution formula and whatnot. But it's a whole different story when you're talking about community, different political subdivisions that don't normally get sales tax dollars. So community colleges, cemetery districts, conservation districts, weed and pest, fire districts. The one that's even more trickier than all of those, I think anyway, is service and improvement districts, right? So as a county, we have people who institute a service and improvement district so that they can have a better water system or better roads or whatever. And that is solely reliant upon property tax, their own property taxes that they themselves vote in. And so if you do away with that or reduce that, that gets really challenging, and those are little pockets. So service and improvement districts, that's not county-wide generally. So that's where it gets really, really tricky. The other thing to consider, and you all are aware of that, is the effect on PILT as well. Right? The federal government is giving us money, payment in lieu of taxes, because we can't tax federal lands. And so they give us some of those PILT dollars. And so if we signal to them, well, actually, we're going to reduce these property taxes, it gives them the excuse to say, okay, well, we're going to reduce your PILT payments. So just something to think about. I think that's it, Mr. Chairman. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you for being here, Commissioner Clem, and thank you for representing this district that I represent now during your time in the legislature. You understand these concepts very well. You've worked on them, and so have you observed any kind of anomalies that you find troubling from the commissioner's standpoint, not from a legislator's standpoint, in regards to the Madden formula? Are there any details in there that you find angst with?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, nothing that I can think of off the top of my head. Again, this was a fight from the get-go. There is a balance, and Jeremiah mentioned a moment ago, you tweak that any which way, and the whole thing starts to unravel and gets out of balance. And is it the greatest? No. Does it disincentivize counties like mine? Yeah, we don't get as much, right? Because it is geared more towards those hardship counties, and I understand that. It does kind of rub me a little bit because we do generate a lot of sales tax dollars. I would like to see those sales tax dollars stay in my county, right? The place where they are generated. But I do understand living in a state, the issues and the challenges, and sort of to try to be neighborly to our other counties, particularly those who aren't as fortunate as Campbell County. It's one of those things that I can live with the Madden formula. I don't have a better alternative.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you for that statement. That's helpful coming from a county commissioner, so that we understand your standpoint, especially from one of the 7 wealthy counties. You had mentioned the residential property tax and taking away this revenue stream. 2 things that you stated. One was that it may be sending a signal to the federal government. What I want to first of all point out very, very clearly, and both of the chairman of the Revenue Committee came back and did clarify that they were specifically talking about residential property taxes, not all property taxes, especially those of minerals and industrial. So now that we're focused on residential, most of those federal properties that we get a PILT in do not include residential property taxes. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, they're not classified one way or the other, right? And so these are federal lands held by the federal government within our state that they claim is theirs. Half the state doesn't belong to us, which is just unfathomable in my opinion. you know, so I think the federal government, if you give them any kind of reason or excuse to do something that may disincentivize us but benefit them, they will take it.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I did come before your body and present exactly what the residential portion of your property tax is. And it's a point well taken when you talk about those special districts. But we have looked at a lot of those special districts across the state. In fact, there was a small one just down in Wright for a water district and sewer district. And so what we're finding across the state that the residential portion of their revenues, that 25% that we gave a reduction on, equated to anywhere from 1% on countywide in a rich county up to maybe 5%. So as long as we've kept it within the residential zone of property taxes, the effect on those local governments has been, I would call it de minimis, being 5% or less. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, certainly in a county such as Campbell, we have not felt the effects of that as much, obviously, because we are very mineral rich. You know, other counties are going to have a different story to tell when it comes to that. Where this does become an issue when we're talking about, you know, making permanent residential property exemptions or whatever, reducing those amounts, is those service and improvement districts, right? It's all residential. I'm trying to rack my brain here. I don't think that there's going to be any commercial property probably involved. Maybe some ag. There's not going to be probably any minerals. So in other words, those service and improvement districts, you get, you know, think of a place out in the county, a little neighborhood that wants to institute us, you know, a better sewer system or whatever. They institute this district. Their monies are all coming from their property taxes, and that's it. And then we match as a county as far as, you know, 1% funds, we do grants and things like that. But so that they're gonna feel that more versus the county at large.
I don't want to extend our moment before our break here too much longer, but you know, you bring up an excellent point. And it's one that our legislative body has really wrestled with recently, and that is these special districts. And they do serve a purpose, but sometimes that purpose goes away. In fact, the district that I mentioned before down in Wright, it has come to a point where, you know, once it got up and running, then it had ratepayers to pay for the ongoing maintenance of that facility. And so if you look at their operating costs versus their collections on rate paying, it covers their costs. And yet they're still collecting a tax. And most people have forgotten about that tax. We tend to forget about the rec mill and things like that, because it's just all lumped together until we see that tax bill once a year. Maybe a small percentage of people look at that and understand it. But what we've wrestled with is de-establishing some of these districts, or in other words, reabsorbing them into the greater government entity, whether it's a city or whether it's a county, because the tax is no longer necessary. And it's almost like there's a wall built around that effort. You really can't undo what we've done. We create a tax and we never eliminate it. And yet we have, you know, either elected, I guess they'd all be elected boards that manage this stuff, but there's not much pressure, not much motivation to disband. What are your thoughts on that issue? And then that'll be the end of it for me, Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chairman Bear. Yeah, I think it depends on what the service and improvement district is for. If you're building a road or something like that, that's not going to generate any income. But I understand the point that you are making. I think it's a valid point. I think that goes back to that service and improvement district. They're the ones who voted for the district. They're the ones who elect their board. They're the ones who did all this. And if they want change, then it's incumbent upon them to make that change. I guess, you know, if I'm not a part of that service and improvement district, I hesitate to stick my nose in somebody else's business and say, actually, you should be doing it this way. And so that's where you know, I would take some pause, at least on my part, on that.
Okay, Senator Driscoll, and then we're
Mr.
going to.
Chairman, not to waylay us. Thank you for that last statement. That was exactly where I was at, was in statutes, there's a process to eliminate the districts if we need to. And these people voted to put their own districts in, and they chose to tax themselves. And if they feel the taxes are oppressive, they can get together and run a ballot initiative and undo them. But it's not, and I'm making a statement, I'm not asking a question. It's not incumbent on us to be the overseeing father of all of them. It's up to them to be able to do it. And that's what I was tied. You didn't like the grocery tax. My feeling is how do we empower local governments, not either fund them or defund them from above? And I for one, feel very sorry for cities and towns and counties that have no ability, particularly in smaller ones, to raise any income. They're just stuck in a certain range. And that goes back to a statement. We're into days of kickback, and the good chairman talked about the 1.1 to 5% impact. Well, I encourage him to come over to Cook County because we're about to lose our only ambulance service, which is volunteer, because of the 25% property tax cuts. We're going to lose part of our firefighting and likely lose our ambulance service because they don't have money to fund it. And interestingly enough, it's all volunteers. None of it's wages. This is about gas, tires, and replacing vehicles. And, you know, for years, I made a comment yesterday, Campbell County's given Cook County firefighting vehicles for years, either free or very close to it. That's really a great function, and it's very noble of them to do that. But for those small counties, particularly you go into hardship, Hot Springs, Weston, Crook, these hardship counties, they're stuck. And the 25% might not sound like much, but they live on dirt right now. And I'm one of the ones that's making a statement that says, look, actions have effects. And we keep talking about this day. Let's move the model 3%. It won't affect anything. Folks, it doesn't create any money from anywhere. What it does is takes from one place and moves to another. And we've got to figure out through this process how we keep everybody reasonably whole. But shoving pieces of the pie around has direct impacts. The real impact of the 25% tax cut we haven't hit because we haven't done the budget yet. That's the 70% that goes to education. And we're going to have to find a place to backfill that. And we compounded it with, we did 30 million a year of vouchers. So you can assure that there's going to be effects on state spending on several of these actions we've taken without really weighing the consequences. Not saying they were right or wrong. I'm saying actions have consequences. Do you believe that's true, Commissioner? Because we're doing it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'll say this. I think the balance is the key word, right? And so there's been a disrupt in that balance, in that, you know, in particular, the funding mechanisms, the constitutional funding mechanisms, the 8 mills for cities and towns, the 12 mills for counties, those were in the Constitution. Those things can't be changed by this legislature. There has been a disrupt in that as far as the number of dollars that those mills generate. And there hasn't been anything to really offset that. And that affects citizens. And, you know, I don't want to get in this whole argument. There's certainly a benefit to the taxpayer itself, right? I benefited from that. It's nice that I benefit from that, but there is a cost, and that cost comes elsewhere. What I will say is, with respect to the grocery tax, and I understand where you're coming from as far as, you know, how do you give these political bodies more flexibility to generate income at the local level? And I guess what I'll say with respect to memorializing direct distribution is, I mean, the whole conversation of direct distribution and memorializing that is because the state did take that away. And my thought is, if you're going to make that option available again, then you know, does the state have the onus then to do any kind of direct distribution at all, on balance? And so personally, I would rather see, you know, the direct distribution, this memorialized, versus having having that option. I think I'm just thinking about the political calculus of all of that and where some of the arguments would come in. And anyway, I'll
Well,
leave it there.
Appreciate that. Members, I'm going to take a 15-minute break and we'll come back. Thank you so much. Let's bring us back. I want to continue to solicit any comments with regard to what we've heard. Again, we had almost 30 minutes of public testimony. Is there anyone else who would like to give us public comment with regard to this morning on the sales and distribution? Anyone? Are there members of the committee who has any thoughts or discussion on this? Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to opine on this one more time before our next meeting. I feel like we've gathered a lot of information. We got some suggestions. I hope that the committee will really think this over and come up with an idea where we should be in the next meeting, and maybe we request a bill draft at that time based on whatever consensus is amongst this body as to the direction we want to go on this. I think overall, there's a pretty compelling argument that we need to do something. I think we're really down to debating what is the percentage that we will change to. I was quite persuaded to believe that the Madden formula being applied to an additional percentage, whatever that is probably the simplest, most direct route to go forward. And we'll keep those of us that are math challenged from spinning our heads off. So I appreciated all the testimony we received. I appreciate the committee's willingness to take this subject up, and I think we're headed in the right direction.
Good. Other discussion? Senator Smith.
First of all, I'd like to thank the County of Campbell and the City of Gillette for funding our schools, most of what we do in the state. So, and anyway, and also it's Co-Chairman Bear's fault here. He said something about a Smith formula. So I started thinking about it. And, you guys need more revenue. Some of these, we have some hardship counties and municipalities need a little more revenue. So I'm thinking, I want to really take a good look at where, how much revenue is being generated from the gaming that we have going on in the state. It's actually gambling for most people, but it's called gaming when in government. But anyway, I'd like to take a good look at that and see if we can't figure out a way to redistribute some of those dollars, and also take a look at the lottery and where that money's going. I'd like to throw that out there.
Okay, discussion on that. Any thoughts? Any additional thoughts on that? Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the proposal that the counties and the cities gave us is a good one. I think I don't have a lot of heartburn about the formula I came up with. I think it was fair and reasonable. And I can say that, I heard the good chairman or the good co-chair talk about, he remembered the conversation from the last time we did direct distribution. I remember it well too. It was at night. I remember the one 2 years before that, and the one 2 years before that, and the one 2 years before that. They were all different. They were all, a lot of promises were made, a lot of deals were struck, individuals heard things differently. And at one time we were up at 180 million. Then in 2018, we dipped down because we were cutting everything, including this. So I think that's the most compelling reason to go with the formula that the counties and the cities laid out. So we can stop having this biannual conversation, biannual bloodletting with all the county commissioners and all the city councilmen and all the promises and all the, where we say, well, we're really tight, we don't have any money. And, we can always look out 2 bienniums and see a deficit as far as the eye can see. Every year that I've been here, if you look out 2 biennium, there was a deficit as far as the eye can see. Each year we come up with a way to balance the budget and do it because we have to. And that's the reason why we're better at this than the federal government, because they make us do it. And so it makes it easier for us. But I think that we should look very seriously at this. I'm going to listen to my leadership when I get told that we're going to do this at the next meeting. I would, at the next meeting, I plan to ask for a bill draft at this percentage. And I hope that you'll entertain it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Any other discussion? Members, I know we're juggling the schedule a bit. I think we've pretty much exhausted, at least as far as what we can do today on the sales and use tax distribution issue. We've had a thorough discussion. I'm glad we've heard from the Wyoming Association of Municipalities and the Wyoming County Commissioners Association, as well as the Department of Revenue. With the co-chair's indulgence, I think perhaps we should perhaps get a little bit of a head start on the DD waiver, developmental disabilities waiver. And I saw the director come in. So Director Johansson, if you'd like to come forward with your folks, and maybe we can get a head start on this.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, yes.
at your discretion, I did prepare a memorandum. It's material index number 16-01 for background.
Please.
If you'd like to dispense with that and proceed with the
No,
agency,
I
I'm more than
would,
happy
I
to
would
write
very
it.
much like to hear. Thank you for that.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I had afternoon and then I realized it is morning. My name is Elizabeth Martineau, a senior fiscal analyst with the Legislative Service Office Budget Fiscal Division. I did, as I mentioned, briefly provide a white paper on the DD waivers program. It's material number 16-01 in your index.
And please take as much time as you need.
I'd actually intended to keep my remarks brief in terms of deference to the agency. I would like to start, though, by thanking the Wyoming Department of Health for their time and assistance in developing this particular white paper. It is an incredibly complex topic, and so I am going to do my very best with the materials they helped provide. Additionally, because this discussion, again, kind of like wildfires, is incredibly complex, the Department of Health has quite a bit of materials they've prepared for their participants. And so we included two of those particular documents for your consideration. Attachment A is the frequently or commonly used acronyms. So if you hear someone say CMS or CM or something that you may not be familiar with, those are probably in there. And additionally, there's also attachment B, which is some commonly used terms, and they're defined kind of for your knowledge as we're having this discussion. To begin, the Wyoming Department of Health has a home and community-based services section that administers two programs. There's the Comprehensive Waiver Program and the Supports Waiver Programs. These are commonly referred to as the DD waiver programs. So when you hear that term, there's two different programs that we will be discussing. These programs offer services specifically to individuals with intellectual and developmental or developmental disabilities from birth through all stages of their life. And we also provide services for those with acquired brain injuries who are 21 years and older. A little bit about the background of these waiver programs. The Federal Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services allows states to administer home and community-based Medicaid services. Specifically, in this instance, CMS is waiving the requirement to provide institutional care if the state funds these programs and the federal government agrees that that is the most cost-effective measure to support and provide services to these individuals in community-based settings. And so the state has these waivers. We have the comprehensive and the supports, as I mentioned, and through local partners and providers in different communities, we deliver very targeted specific services under these waiver programs. Services include, for example, case management, CM, crisis intervention, personal care, respite, specialized equipment if that's needed, transportation. There are a whole host of different services that are provided to these individuals for all of their different needs. In the white paper on page 2, I use the example of individual companion services. All of these services have minimum units, they have rates that are assigned to them, as well as in some instances, some prerequisites or some considerations on restrictions for those specific services. Attachment C, if you want to see what the gamut of services are right now, that's all in Attachment C, another document prepared by the Department of Health to help their participants understand this particular program. Each participant in the comprehensive waiver and the supports waiver receives a budget to help them purchase or procure these services. And so for the comprehensive waiver, it is a bit of a complicated formula, but it actually has three parts. We have the level of service or our level of service score, which is based on a specific assessment that is conducted, the living situation of that individual, and then their age. So based on those three factors, they're given a budget. This budget can range from $21,000 all the way through to $210,000. What drives these costs is the individual's needs and that assessment of what they need to be supported. So that's actually attachment, I believe it's D, and it actually provides the calculation, so the specifics on how those level of services are determined, and then the budget matrix, so you can see where a person falls. I provided some examples in the memorandum of if an individual is living at home, if they're at a certain age, if they have a certain kind of level of service score. And so those are in there for your consideration of kind of how folks are having those budgets calculated for the comprehensive waiver. The supports waiver is a little different where it's a set maximum. It's a more flexible budget meant to help individuals get quicker services who are coming to the wait list, or there's other circumstances where they wouldn't need the comprehensive level of supports. They can always come and request to have more comprehensive services if they need, and the department will consider those considerations. The maximum budget right now for the supports waiver is $22,712 for participants who are birth through age 21. And if they're in school, if school age applies, that's part of it. And then for participants on the supports waivers who are 21 years and older, that's $26,511. As
Yes.
Just for clarity, that is an annual number. Is that correct?
correct. In terms of funding, because the DD waiver programs are Medicaid-related programs, they actually can be found in the Healthcare Financing Division within the Department of Health budget. So as found on page 3 of the white paper, which kind of has a bit of the funding and the appropriations, the Comprehensive Waiver Program is Unit 0485, and the Supports Waiver Program is 0486. So you won't find a DD waivers unit. You will find these two units if you were looking for those programs. The department also provides some additional supports for both of these programs in the Healthcare Financing Administration. That's where you'll see the personnel. When you look at these particular units, it is only the it's money that goes to the actual participants, so the 600 series, as well as some cost allocation. So for this current biennium, for 25-26, the legislature has appropriated $296 million for the Comprehensive Waiver Program and $23 million for the Supports Waiver Program. When you look at the historic appropriations, I would note for both programs, it's roughly half is state general fund and half is a federal fund. That mix has shifted over the years because we had events like the global pandemic that kind of shifted how that funding was. And so now you see more traditional 50-50 split between those two funding sources. I would also note that if you look at the general trends for the appropriations, the state has historically supported these programs, even when we had statewide budget reductions in 2017 and 2021. There was a priority put on these populations. So to get to the services and how much is being appropriated, part of that is this idea of how much is the cost of these services. So the department is required by statute to do a rebasing study. So they're supposed to look at the rates that are being provided and then every 4 years, but not every more than 2, determine based on stakeholder input, a variety of objective analyses and other information, even from the participants and providers themselves, what is the appropriate rate for each of these services? Once they have conducted that study, and there is quite a bit of process in that engagement of stakeholders, they then go ahead and present, if it is something they would like to recommend as a steering committee, then they present that to the governor and the legislature for their consideration. The most recent cost rebasing study was actually conducted last year by the consultant Guidehouse, Inc., and the final report was issued in September of 2024. I would note that at that time the report was issued, the steering committee voted and said, yes, we would like this report to be published, but they did not recommend the rate rebasing. I would just note from the report itself, it says that the steering committee was concerned about the cost survey data. And when looking at longer term financial commitments at that magnitude that was considered in that initial rebasing study, they wanted more information before proceeding in that regard. So the full 2024 Guidehouse report was provided to JAC last fall.
I'm sorry, Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Again, apologize for the interruption. So has a new study been ordered, and what is the cost of that study?
Mr. Chairman, I will have to defer to the agency on the cost of their contract for that study, but I know the statutory requirement is to study the rebasing every 4 years, not more than every 2, and that was just issued last year. So I don't know if they can, technically, and again, I'll defer to Franz and Stefan, I don't know if they can restudy that again, given that limitation. But I am not an attorney, so I will defer to the Department of Health.
So you just said that there was a cost rebasing in 2024?
Study.
The study.
So the steering committee, there was a whole process. They went through and studied rebasing and how much those services, like a projected new cost for those services. And the steering committee voted to release the report. So all of the work that was done, they said, yes, please release that report. But their recommendation was to not issue the rebasing amount that was recommended in that report.
Why?
My understanding of the documentation that I read felt that the information that they received was not sufficient, or it was, they wanted more cost survey data. I will defer to the Department of Health on that particular nuance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will say, though, while you received the full study last fall, we did include an excerpt in the back of the white paper as well for your consideration. It does have the executive summary, kind of outlining some of the items I just discussed, as well as those proposed benchmarks. So you can see the difference between what is effective today in terms of the rates they receive as compared to the proposed benchmark for some of those services. Finally, the white paper ends with some data and information on historical participation enrollment, waitlist, and emergency cases. In the past, legislators have expressed interest in knowing how many individuals are receiving these services and who is still on these waitlists. And so looking at figure 1 on page 6, pardon me. We can see that the trend in the adult services has been increasing over the years, and the child waiver, or the children on this or participate in either of these waivers, pardon me, has remained steady, as well as those of acquired brain injuries. The waitlist, as you can see from table 5 on page 6, has fluctuated over the years, and the legislature has made varying efforts to bring those waitlist numbers down. Currently, there's 335 individuals on the waitlist. Finally, page 7 provides some additional information about the emergency cases that do come up. There's an extraordinary care committee that considers these cases, and so there's a lot of rules and policies and regulations behind these services. Yes, sir?
So a question, 335 wait list. So we have 335 individuals who are seeking help, but are still waiting for that help. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, sir. And so that extraordinary care committee can meet and make specific determinations for participants, especially if their health, safety, or welfare is at risk. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that is the highlight of the white paper that I provided.
Good information. Thank you. Questions from committee? Any questions? Yes. Yes. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have information in front of you in terms of the timeline of an emergency response? So if a patient's care status changes or something happens to their caregiver and they put in a request for emergency, the state has to respond within 48 hours, within a week? Like, is there a time frame for when that emergency needs to be addressed? Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Sherwood, I will defer to the Department of Health on that. It was my understanding that they address those as immediately as they can, but I don't have those timeframes.
Other questions? Yes, Representative Pendergraph.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this may be better directed to the Department of Health, but those 335 people in the queue, how long have they been waiting?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pendergraph, I will defer to the Department of Health on those.
I assume then if we wanted to break down on whether those are adults or children, we'll wait for the department as well on that.
That's in there, sir, in that table.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Good.
263 adults and children and 60.
Go ahead.
260 and 60.
60. Thanks.
60 adults.
60 children.
68 adults. 60 are adults, 260 is children, sorry.
260 is children. Yes, Representative Angelos.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And this could be a question for the department, and so I'll just forewarn them that they could be looking this up. But what was the rebase rate? Just how much was that when they rebased from the study? If you could give me that when you come back. Thank you.
Other comments? Questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Very good. Director, Department of Health, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Stefan Johansson, I'm the director for the Wyoming Department of Health. It's good to be with you this morning and a nice, lovely, cloudy green drive over from Natrona County today. So I think we arrived right in time to tackle this topic. Appreciate the invitation to discuss our developmental disability waiver programs. Ms. Martineau did an excellent job with the white paper on some baseline information. So I won't reiterate all of those points, but mention a few things before handing it over to my colleague, who's our state Medicaid agent. His name is Lee Grossman, to get into more detail and also answer any questions that you might have. As you know, we have several waiver, quote unquote, waiver programs in the Department of Health in our Medicaid function. And what those are historically are abilities for states' Medicaid programs to waive certain provisions of the Social Security Act, which generally governs Medicaid. In these cases, how these programs developed were in lieu of other types of services that Medicaid funds or provides, like institutional level care in nursing homes or intermediate care facilities. Waivers became an option for states, really kind of expanding in the 1990s to offer alternatives. So instead of or in lieu of providing those services in an institution, like a state hospital, like a nursing facility, or an intermediate care facility for those with certain disabilities, to provide those in a home and community-based way. And that's really where the term waiver comes from, because you waive certain provisions that were originally governing a Medicaid program to provide or fund those services in a way that's different than that institutional care. And that is the case with our excuse me,
Co-Chairman Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Director, thank you for that introduction. This waiver, I mean, what they're suggesting is that they would pay for putting these people into an institution. So I don't think we have institutions in Wyoming that they could be put into. So does that mean that these people would have to leave the state if we did not use this waiver?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Bear, it's a good question. In general, yes, waivers developed, decades ago as a way to bounce off of or be in lieu of institutional care. Historically, where this care would have been provided in Wyoming are at facilities like the Wyoming Resource Center, which we still have, but its capacity and its mission per the legislature has changed pretty dramatically over time. If you go back to the 1960s, 1970s with the Life Resource Center, formerly called the State Training School, there were, I believe, over 700 residents at that facility. Today, that facility, having a more narrow mission, and because there are these community-based programs, is built at 100-bed capacity. So that's kind of the development of where this came from. But to your point, right now, to answer your question, if all of our participants that would be eligible for a program like this were to be served in more of an institutional setting, Wyoming would likely not have that capacity in state facilities.
Follow up, Mr. Co-Chair, thank you. So these 260 or so that are on wait listing, how many of them are going out of state to receive treatment or help, or what is their solution in the meantime? Or is it just simply to wait?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Bear, kind of a mixed bag there. Generally, waiting for that service, that funding and that budget amount to be delivered. But depending on the person, depending on their healthcare coverage, other public programs, mental health services that we have outside of, Medicaid, could be accessing those as well. Or again, depending on their family circumstance, geography, where they live, potentially receiving some supports through other mechanisms outside of the Medicaid or the waiver program. But it would be hard to say definitively with every case.
So why are they waiting? Is it a funding issue?
Mr. Chairman, that's right. And so if you, both in the LSO memo and the documents that we provided, you can see some both graphs and tables of that wait list. It is generally governed by the budget that we have in Unit 485. So what we try to point out, and I think the big takeaway for me, or at least what we wanted to communicate here, is that when it comes to these RDD waiver programs and the policy options that this committee and the legislature has, there's kind of three policy directions that can sometimes be in tension with each other when it comes to the budget. One is funding new people off the wait list. The second is setting or funding provider rates. And then the third would be within programs like this, 2,600 participants and others around the state, you have kind of a continuum of acuity where you have folks at more severe level of service needs and folks at lesser level of service needs. That third kind of policy priority from my perspective, the department's perspective, is providing service and funding for some of your more severe acute cases that might even end up in the legal system, in jail, in the state hospital, high needs adolescents. So a much bigger issue, but a small relative handful of people that have more severe acuity, comorbid conditions, et cetera. So on page 1 of the short brief that we provided to the Appropriations Committee, you see those bullet points where I think from the appropriations perspective and legislative perspective in general, those three items really govern what we're able to provide in terms of service, both in funding the wait list and provider rates, as well as that challenge that we've had more of, especially recently on the adolescent side, with extremely complex cases, conditions, disabilities, and mental health issues and behaviors that we're struggling to find placement for.
So a couple questions. Of the 335, you would agree that there's 260 are children and around 60 are adults, is that right?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that's accurate.
They're all Wyoming citizens, correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I believe so.
Are you going, do you have the ability to provide us with information on the cost if we wanted to determine the cost of providing those services to the 335?
Mr. Chairman, we can absolutely do that. Going back, and I think both the LSO graphs and tables and the materials in our presentations show this. So several years ago, this committee and the legislature, in addition to appropriating funding for provider rates, also appropriated about $7.5 million to direct the department to fund a certain amount of people off of the wait list. At that time, that $7.5 million, which is both federal funds and general funds for a biennial period, funded about half of the people on the wait list. So in that table, you can see over the last 4 or 5 years, you see that wait list number reduce. But it wasn't full funding necessary to completely eliminate the wait list. It was about half of the people on the wait list. And Mr. Chairman, generally speaking, where we really start to see that pressure, obviously we want to help these participants and their families as quickly as we can, but restricted and governed by the budget that's set for the department. When we see participants waiting more than an average of 18 months, and I know that seems like an extreme amount of time to wait, it is. But that's really where that pressure builds from the top, where the policy tension that we all struggle with, this committee, the legislature, and the department, between funding provider rates and actually providing budget for services for people to come off the wait list, is a decision we always have to wrestle with. And as long as I've been here, has been a tough consideration for the legislature with a limited amount of resources that we all know we work within in Wyoming. do we fund provider rates in this cycle based on the rebasing study that might be available or that might be coming, or do we fund the wait list? So we can absolutely provide specific figures for you, or as you go in later into this interim and into the next session, exactly what those wait list and budget figures would be.
I think that would be very helpful. Representative Angelos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, one thing maybe you could bring it the next time, because I know it's probably doing some numbers. Out of the 335, 60 adults, 260 children, do you have an idea of who would be on a support waiver and who would be on a more comprehensive waiver? Do you have that number breakdown, specifically between adults and children? Because I know there's a higher level of need there.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Angelos, we can absolutely prepare that and prepare it quickly. I'll ask Mr. Grossman to speak to that in terms of how that works when we fund people onto the supports waiver versus folks who become eligible for the comprehensive waiver. Lee?
Yes, let me get to this answer and then I'll recognize you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Angelos, and members of the committee, my name is Lee Grossman. I serve as the state Medicaid agent at the Wyoming Department of Health. So generally speaking, Representative Angelos, the answer to your questions is all would be on the supports waiver. And I'll get into this a little bit later in some of our introductory materials, but the way the current model works is folks are funded to the supports waiver directly from the wait list. That's really that first stop.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, back to the wait list. I think you, at least in part, answered my question about an average wait time somewhere around 18 months. Could you confirm that that's the answer? And then to back that up, are the wait times weighted according to acuity? If you have a more serious case, is it pushed to the front of the line, or how does that work?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pendergraft, to answer generally, right now we don't have anybody waiting over 18 months, which is good news. Our average right now is 14 or 15 months on the wait list. I'll hand it over to Mr. Grossman on the more detailed question.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Pendergraft, if there's a situation, an emergent situation, you heard a little bit earlier about the Extraordinary Care Committee. That is the mechanism that's established through administrative rule by which an individual would request emergent placement onto the waiver program, essentially moving to the very top of the wait list. So, and there's specified criteria for what that looks like, et cetera. As you can imagine, anytime there's a wait list, there's significant pressure, right, in terms of what that looks like. So we do have to have some criteria, obviously, for what that would look like.
So, yes, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to get my head wrapped around as we're talking about your 14 to 15 months on wait list. No, you're good. 14 to 15 months on wait list. So obviously, are we seeing people moving out? Are we seeing people aging out? Are we seeing people, I mean, in a realm of deceased? I mean, how are we, what, I mean, I'm seeing that we're seeing this increase, this inflow, but how are we getting that on the backside? Can you explain that? And then just real quick numbers, we're looking at like 6.7 million for adult waivers, 5.7 million for child waivers, and about 400,000 for the brain injury waivers is roughly what I would say if you were to clear the docket right now. Am I about right in that? Just shy of 13 million?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haraldson, I'll double check those figures, but I think you're in the ballpark. Like I mentioned before, a couple of years ago, on a biennial basis, $7.5 million funded approximately half of the wait list. So currently, since that we have seen that reduction in the past couple of years, that would be close. But we'll double check and confirm those figures of exactly what it would cost.
Senator Larson. Oh, did you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just could you answer that first? That how are they clearing out? How are they coming in? Can you kind of just give us a little bit of movement on this process?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Representative Haraldson. So folks who are on the DD waivers, comprehensive or support, we think of these as really lifelong programs because an individual with Down syndrome has Down syndrome, right, for the entirety of their lifespan. So what we see, what that means is very low attrition in terms of people leaving the program. That's why you have that wait list build up over time. And as appropriators, I'm sure that can perhaps be frustrating in terms of, well, we funded this and now it's built up again. And again, that's because you just see a low volume of folks who leave the program. Typically, it is due to the fact that they have passed away, occasionally moved out of state, and I would say even more rarely are found to be financially ineligible in terms of over resource or income limits. But the vast majority being folks who have passed away.
Follow up?
Yes.
Thank you. So with that being said, are we back to that? It sounds like we're back to this point again, where it's almost like 14 to 15 months won't be where we're sitting soon. Is that what I'm hearing? Like we're about at that cliff where we're going to see this really accelerate to where we're not able to service these individuals in that 14 to 15 month window.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haroldson, that's right. And it really, not trying to indicate a preference here that we have a target of we want to stay under 18 months or 12 months or 6 months. It's somewhat of a, choose our adventure together as a legislative and executive branch body of how to deploy those resources. Some states have made decisions in their waiver programs to fund the wait list entirely, have a zero wait list. That comes at the opportunity cost of other legislative priorities, quite frankly, whether in the department or outside of it. And again, kind of in tension with the other area that you've heard a lot about and will hear a lot about, of having provider networks that can provide the services, both on the supports waivers, smaller mom and pop shops, so to speak, and larger providers who provide a different role with more residential services, habilitative services, those types of things. So not easy policy decisions at all, but you're absolutely right. It comes down to, as Mr. Grossman mentioned, as folks get served off the wait list and put onto the program, you kind of have that constant feeding of new applicants coming in. And that's where you see that wait list fluctuate over time based on legislative appropriations and just the volume that we see in the population.
Senator Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the new applicants that are coming in, are they moving into the state? Is that usually what's happening, or can you explain?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Larson. So that could be one of the scenarios where someone has moved from another state to Wyoming, and maybe they were even on a wait list in another state, because just to be very clear, these wait lists are common and in many cases longer than what we have in Wyoming. I would say most commonly, and this is just based on my experience with the program, is that you have a parent who from one way or another finds out that their child may have an intellectual or developmental disability. And sometimes that can take some time before that parent finds out about this resource, applies, gets on the wait list. So don't have a numbers breakdown for you there in terms of what that looks like, but just from my anecdotal experience, that's the most common way.
Representative Angelos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have, Mr. Grossman, do you have an idea on how many, what other states, what their wait list times are? Do you know, even surrounding us, like South Dakota, Colorado, Montana?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Angelos, off the top of my head, I don't have a lot of that data. And as I'm sure you can imagine, it fluctuates significantly based on conversations like these. Some of the states more recently, I know Nebraska has made an effort to get rid of their wait list. Oklahoma is another one that comes to mind. That is not an exclusive list by any means, just some of the more recent ones I'm aware of. So it's an acute focus for sure with policymakers such as yourself in terms of what that wait list looks like in a particular state. But we can take that back and see if we can get a more comprehensive list, especially in our region, of what that looks like too.
Okay, a lot of questions here, and I have some. Senator Grew and then Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, tell me, when someone's on the wait list, let's say my child's on the wait list, tell me about that. Are you engaging those folks? Are you looking at, so as they come up on the waiting list and transition onto the program itself, that it's not just a revelation, that you actually have an idea of what those services are needed, where you program them in, and how you program them in? Is that how that works?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Guru, I'm going to give an initial answer here and also phone a friend. Over in the front row, you'll see some colleagues, in addition to Franz Fuchs, Deputy Director of the Department of Health, who I'm imagine many of you know, joined by Elizabeth Forsland, who's our administrator of our Home and Community-Based Services section. So Elizabeth, this is your cue to come up to the table while I start answering the question. But generally speaking, for those folks who are on the wait list, one, an inquiry in terms of, let's say if this is your child, of just wanting to know where you're at on the wait list. Very routine question, right? And that's information that we're able to provide and happy to provide. So that way folks can obviously plan and know where their status is on the wait list. But I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Forsland, to talk a little bit more about what that experience may look like for a family or an individual on the wait list.
Good morning, Elizabeth Forsland, Home and Community-Based Services Administrator. Mr. Chairman, to answer and follow up on that question a little bit more, individuals on the wait list are also receive a service called Targeted Case Management. It is a limited in scope service, but individuals are able to select a case manager who provides them with coordination and support while they are on that waiting list. So it isn't a no contact kind of situation, provides them with, limited supports and stays in touch with them the time that they are on that waiting list. And so, of course, our team is able to provide any answers to questions, as Mr. Grossman said, that might come up along the way, but people generally keep a very close eye on where they are on the waiting list as well.
Mr. Chair, thank you guys for being here. Just a quick question on the numbers. So I'm looking at figure 1 on page 6, this report I'm looking at, and it looks like, I just want to know, like, there's probably a logical explanation. The program seems to really expanded. We had 955 folks in 1997, and today we have 1,802. Kind of want to know, just walk me through, it's doubled, and this is a very large expense. And I want to know how that occurred and the logistics behind it. Why?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Smith, it's a really good question. I'll answer generally kind of in the movement since the 80s and 90s with what we've seen in these programs developing and hand it over to Ms. Forsland for some additional detail. As I mentioned in my opening comments, these programs specifically didn't really become implemented around the country in Medicaid programs really until the 90s is when 1990s is when they took off. So part of that growth is just there's a new service in lieu of, more institutional based care that's available. I think program development and awareness in the population in Wyoming and around the country becomes more prevalent. And so I don't think you're necessarily seeing, a differing kind of eligibility that's been implemented. This is based on both financial and clinical condition-based eligibilities, similar to our other Medicaid programs. But, when you start to get into the 2000s and these become more reinforced in states as options for certain individuals, that's where that growth comes from. In addition, as we discussed before, and as Mr. Grossman mentioned, the awareness of, developmental and intellectual disabilities continues to grow. And sometimes folks don't find out that their child has a disability until later in their adolescence, or even in some cases into adulthood, even knowing that programs like this existed. So I think there's some natural growth in those numbers there. But Elizabeth, anything you'd like to add?
The only thing that I would add, Mr. Chairman and Senator Smith, is that you would see a corresponding, also the presentation previously outlined, if not for the waivers, people would be receiving these services in an institutional type setting. And so I don't have the materials in front of me, I apologize, but you see a corresponding decrease in the number of individuals served in an institutional setting in Wyoming, while the number of individuals served in a home and community-based setting increases, is the only addition that I would have.
Okay, Mr. Chair, just a follow-up question. Just looks like really, so it increased significantly from 97 to let's say 2010 by about, the number's about 500 increase. We're batting around, let's say 1,300. And then the last 10, 12 years, it spiked again. It's up to 1,800. I just, did the standards change for, the population hasn't changed. In fact, the population might be even lower now than it was in the 2008-9 before we had the correction. So I'm just kind of curious why this significant increase then. And I can see the 90s if the program just got implemented. I'm just trying to process why we have such an increase in numbers here.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Smith, I probably don't have a great answer to your question, not intending to be frustrating here. But to Elizabeth's point, I think really even before this chart, going back to the 70s and 80s, as I mentioned before, we had hundreds and hundreds of people at our state facility in Lander, the Life Resource Center, formerly called the State Training School. And so in those decades, even preceding this, is when that deinstitutionalization nationally was really being pushed. Not just with this population, but with state hospitals. Our state hospital in Evanston at one point had 700, 800 clients in it. Today we have about 80. And so that preference, both nationally and in state governments, to provide more community-based settings as opposed to institutional care, I think that trajectory is playing out here in the chart that goes back to the 1997. But before that, I think you'd see a corresponding growth in community-based service. What's not on this chart, and we could look at providing it for our state facilities to the committee, you would see that corresponding decrease of just the volume that's served in what are generally more expensive institutional settings.
So 2 questions. First of all, can you help me better understand what we're looking at in the more severe cases? What is a daily routine? What are the challenges of a more severe case? And then second of all, Director, can you spend a couple minutes discussing with me setting the provider rates and what the challenges are, and both of those, please. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, happy to with your first question. Kind of, I'll ask Ms. Forsland if she can maybe give. We have level of service that gets kind of measured clinically, and so you can see that just in the numbers that are in some of your materials, in what that looks like between level 1 and level 6. But Elizabeth, you want to give an overview of what a level 6 might look like versus a level 1?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. I think that I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there are some community service providers over my right shoulder in the audience here who could absolutely give you more of a picture of a day-to-day supports, as I am not boots on the ground providing those services. But from a program administration perspective, what we really look at for that level of service that is needed is the level of supervision and supports, the number of individuals that might be needed to staff a person and provide them, supports in their daily life. On the lower end of our level of service scale, if you will, we have people who might be very independent, might need help only once in a while, might not need 24-hour on-site services, and might need some help with some complex tasks, transporting themselves places and that sort of thing. On the other end of the spectrum, we have up to a level 6 level of service score. Those individuals might need help with every type of task in their day-to-day life, including bathing, grooming, eating, bathrooming, any task that you go about in your day-to-day life. Some of those individuals also might have behavioral concerns or behavioral challenges because they might have additional serious mental illness, for example, that would provide a level of service that would require 2 staff members to every 1 individual on a regular basis for help with those tasks. That's generally how the level of service score works. And Mr. Fuchs created and was instrumental in creating a complex formula that determines what your level of service score would be with a needs assessment, and also some math that folks smarter than me could, I think, explain to you all. But that determines level of funding that is paid to the providers delivering those types of services. As far as specific diagnoses or what those challenges really look like for staff members, again, I would defer to the service providers that are in the audience today.
And I will definitely get to them. Director, then on the setting the provider rates.
Mr. Chairman, happy to address that. On our slide deck presentation we shared with you, just a few bullet points on slide number 10. As Ms. Martineau mentioned in her overview, we are required by statute to do a rate rebasing study periodically. That most recent study was completed in the fall of last year, and the report issued the recommendations from a steering committee, which includes not just Department of Health staff, but legislative members, provider members on that steering committee that make those recommendations. That resulted in the recommendation had a $12 million general fund annual impact. So if you take that on a biennium for state general funds, it was $24 million. Then if you match that biennial general fund with federal funds, that results in a $48 million a cost increase that the legislature can consider. Mr. Chairman, based on the discussion earlier this morning, going over the LSO memo, I think it's important to mention we do rate studies and rate rebasings in a variety of different areas of the department. Some are required by statute, some are not, but we use actuarial analysis and rate and cost studies to try to provide this body with information of how close are we to cost coverage in funding nursing homes, for example, folks who are in nursing homes or other provider settings. And so it's a pretty common practice for the department to go through those. Where it varies is what kind of data source, either public or private, we have to develop those estimates. For providers like hospitals and nursing homes, they're required by the federal government, if they participate in Medicare or Medicaid, to file what are called cost reports. And so we have a pretty definitive source of data for hospitals and nursing homes to bounce off of, to look at what are our Medicaid rates for hospitals or nursing home fundings in comparison to allowable costs by a federal cost report, for example. So you'll hear that a lot in our budget presentations as we get into JAC hearings later this year and going into the next session of cost coverage. The DD provider system is a little bit different because those types of cost reports do not exist. They're not required at the federal level. So this rate rebasing study uses a consultant that the department hires to try to collect that type of cost information at the provider level to determine both in terms of wages that are being paid, overhead, physical plant, all of these different things that might go into a provider's cost to deliver the service, then compared to the rates that the department is paying, which are based on the appropriations that the legislature makes into the program. What that rate model includes, like I mentioned, there's a wage input and then other direct and indirect expenses that I gave you a few examples that is very common to any sort of provider or business organization of what your input costs are. Typically speaking, that's why we do these studies, even when they're not legislatively required in statute, is to try to get a sense in these types of safety net or public services of how close to, on average statewide, to providers' cost structure is the Department of Health, and in this case, Medicaid, paying for those services. And that results in different recommendations in different years. But in all of those scenarios, the legislature always has the option to fund fully, to not fund, or to fund partially. And so I also liken it to our developmental preschools, a separate program in the Department of Health that we talked about a lot in this year's session, that has a similar dynamic where we bring what external cost adjustments might be there from inflation, from cost increases that could have occurred or passed on to us from the Department of Education's ECA, and then the legislature has the option to fund, to not fund, or to fund partially. And so you always exercise that ability to do that. I would just bring it back, Mr. Chairman, to those three kind of tensions that we have in a relatively large system like this, with quite a bit of participants. That on the one hand, there's provider rates. We need providers delivering services. On the other hand, we also have folks waiting for their own budgets to come on to services, and that's again sometimes a difficult balance to weigh.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the slides and reminded me that I had a question on the fifth slide, talking about eligibility. Lists assets no more than $2,000. Is that something that is actually ever audited? And then do we have people that are disqualified? Do they have to liquidate things, or could you address that?
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pendergraft, that's a great question. So this asset limit is the same for all in Medicaid, what we consider long-term care populations. So this $2,000 would apply to folks who are on the DD waivers that we're talking about today. In a nursing facility, for example, is the other most common one. So that $2,000 asset limit is verified before someone is onto services. So through the Medicaid application process, which is quite in depth in terms of the level of verification we're looking for, the method. Some of those we can do electronic. For example, some bank accounts can be verified through electronic interfaces, other income sources, but some have to be manual, which is obviously cumbersome in terms of how we go about getting some of those things. Some history behind that is that asset limit has been established at the $2,000 level since, I believe, late 80s, early 90s. You can probably imagine how things have changed, right? I think we all intuitively know that. So that might be a conversation for another day, but history just behind kind of what that is, how we go about doing that, and how it's applied beyond just this group we're talking about here today.
Yes, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm looking at that and thinking $2,000, are we looking at physical property as well? I realize that the house and the vehicle are excluded for that. But man, it doesn't take very long to come up with 2,000, or is that just strictly cash assets? And then the other question on that, is that something we could modify at the state level, or does that have to be done through federal Medicaid?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pendergraft. So I'm going to take that in reverse orders. This is a state option where we get to elect what that looks like. Other states have different levels. I would say 2,000 is not uncommon. Quite a few states have this, and we have a comprehensive look at it that we'd be happy to follow up with in terms of where states are at here. It requires federal approval, but that's something that is on a fairly frequent basis where we, on behalf of the state, amend what's called our Medicaid state plan to the federal government. They review and approve. Again, very common sort of process. So just in terms of what that looks like, absolutely state control over that decision point. A couple of additional items that I wanted to mention on this. When we're talking about the waiver programs, we've talked a lot about kids who might be on the wait list or getting funded. And this just looks at, for this program, the assets of that participant. So not many kids have assets over $2,000 typically. So we don't often see that impact, for example, children who are applying for the program. But let's say someone is over that asset limit, then there is a spend down process essentially where someone is looking to get, they may be paying privately for care, et cetera, until they get below that asset limit. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Last follow-up. I was thinking more of the adults in the system and specifically because I've seen this happen personally, a brain injury. And how would that negatively affect the family if it was the breadwinner, so to speak, of the family? So that's something that I would like to look at more. And if you have more input on that, I'd like to talk to you aside. Thank you.
I would like to look at that as well. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, just following along on that, and I've had discussions with many of you in this context on the asset limits and income eligibility for various Medicaid programs, including these waivers, our nursing home population, and others. And as Mr. Grossman mentioned, it is a state option to, amend that state plan or those provisions and seek federal approval for that. So it's something that we can model out for you of what it would look like. Typically speaking, if you were to raise the asset or the income threshold, there's going to be a certain volume of additional participants that would be eligible, which we would calculate for you as how many additional member months in any given year would we plan on covering, which would kind of dictate the cost, whether that's in this program, funding the wait list, as well as potentially new participants if that asset or income threshold were raised. We would do the same thing for our long-term care populations in nursing facilities as well.
So for the committee's information, we're coming up to the noon hour pretty soon. obviously, we're going to give plenty of opportunities after the lunch break for everyone to testify on this issue. So do not worry about that. Two questions quickly. Is the reimbursement model different than the setting the provider rates? And then secondly, I know that we're still waiting on the budget from the executive branch, but a piece of information that would be very helpful to me in the coming weeks. I'm particularly interested in level 5 and level 6, and those 335 individuals waiting. Maybe you can give me a cost estimate. I'd like to have general numbers of what we're looking at. I think there's a feeling on the committee's part, some of us, that we want to take a look at what we can do in this regard. So, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, we're more than happy following this meeting and during this interim to provide those options and cost and model them out when it comes to the wait list or provider rates, depending on the decisions that this body might want to take on. I can sense a little trying to twist my arm with some teasers on the budget prep for the 27-28 budget. You're right, we have not developed that or had it approved by the governor yet. That typically happens later in the summer and early in the fall. And we're just in the process now of developing the draft budget request for the Department of Health. To your point, though, there were several items in this last session in the Department of Health, both on the Medicaid side, the developmental preschool side, that both chambers had taken action on the floor, but ultimately with the budget not passing, those things didn't cross the finish line. So we're considering those in our 27-28 budget request, but none of that is final yet. We did work with the governor's office and worked with my team to in this program and others to make sure that we did our best to minimize system impact in this interim period before the 27-28 budget gets set with some of those items. But Mr. Chairman, happy to, outside of that process, if the chairs or this committee are considering those options, Department of Health is absolutely a resource to you on the analysis, data modeling, and cost of some of those decisions.
And I know my co-chair was looking at the cost for the study, and you'll get that. The reimbursement model versus the provider rates, is there a difference in those two?
Mr. Chairman, very generally, I'll have Lee and Elizabeth fill in gaps that I might miss. But as Ms. Forsland explained, when participants apply and are potentially going to be funded onto this program, there's a level of service score based on their condition, acuity, et cetera, that is issued. And then there's a formula to develop what on the comprehensive waiver would be, or on the waiver program in general, called an individual budget amount that's given to that specific person. And so those participants have budgets, and then there's a formula to determine based on that level of service, essentially the acuity and condition of the participant, what a provider, a community provider, would be paid. So those rates vary, but Lee or Elizabeth, please fill in the blanks if I missed anything.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I would add is if you're trying to discern what the reimbursement versus sort of that rate methodology looks like, just think of it as on the rate development side, we're trying to gather all the inputs and understand what the cost to deliver the service is. The reimbursement rate is once that's been finalized, that's what's going out the door from the state to the provider who's offering, who's billing us for that service.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Let me ask you this question before we break. The providers out there, are you concerned in any way that because of the reimbursement rate, you're going to lose providers in the coming years?
Mr. Chairman, it's a difficult question because it's a mixed bag. We have providers of all types in a program like this, larger, what we typically call agency providers. And then if you look at the supports waiver data, that's a lot of very small providers, even family members, et cetera, that provide that caretaking or that service. In terms of your larger or agency providers, again, kind of a mixed bag on the overall provider financial side, where you absolutely have some providers that are more on a knife's edge of financial sustainability, and I'm sure you'll hear from some of them. I hope you do today. And then you have others that, based on those financial indicators, are more relatively healthy. It's hard for me to make a judgment call because it does vary so much, but we do have across a number of different providers types that the Department of Health works with, including hospitals, nursing homes, these types of developmental disability or community providers, mental health centers, a provider financial health report that we put together that leverages both cost reports, federal cost reports for hospitals and nursing homes, as well as for certain, not all, certain providers that file Form 990 nonprofit filings with the IRS. We can get some indication of financial benchmarks in terms of days cash on hand, overall margin, staffing costs, et cetera, to compare both within the state and nationally or regionally with similar sized or similar type providers. I offer that not because it's a silver bullet to say you can look at that data and say exactly, a provider or provider system's financial health. But you can look impressionistically of how the systems are trending. Are we seeing more thin margins in these types of providers? And we're happy to share that again with the committee if it's helpful. It's a big report. It's not light weekend reading, but I think as a reference document to see provider by provider how they've trended, it's helpful. The last thing I'll mention there is that with all of those types of data sources to try to gauge financial health, there's a significant lag, and because the data is typically 1 to 2 years old by the time it's available and we can analyze it. So there's some challenges in doing that. So I think it benefits this committee, certainly the department, to have those discussions directly with the service providers.
And then there are family member providers, correct, that are just providing for their own?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay. Any other questions before we break? Okay, thank you. We will take our break and come back at 1 o'clock.